And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. It's great to have everyone here. Thank you so much. I know we had a late start tonight, but we have late breaking news regarding the secret space program trademark controversy, which I'm going to plug in right here at the open. Before I do, I'm going to go to the lovely Olivia, who joins us now.
Hi, everybody.
And of course, we're going to be taking your questions. And I want to inform everybody that in the second half of the broadcast, we're going to have author Walter Bosley of the Empire of the Wheel series. And we're going to be going deep, deep into the real secret space program, which is really what this is all about. And but there's so many things that have happened. You know, last week on Friday, we launched a campaign for no secret space program trademark, because the secret space program, of course, has been in the public domain and represents a good deal of the research that we do here on Dark Journalist, and also among great researchers like Catherine Austin Fitts, who developed the missing trillions, and Dr. Joseph Farrell, and just scores of others. And there was a strange attempt that was made to trademark it and keep it under intellectual property, which presented all sorts of problems. And we brought it up to everyone's attention immediately, and the response was phenomenal. The people in the community stood up to this kind of reckless approach, which was very corporate-minded, to sign and seal this SSP, Secret Space Program trademark, for one group, so that they had access to it, and that they would be legally protected, and would, you know, sort of slap legal letters on other people who are attempting to do this research. And this is one of the most absurd things that have ever come down the pike, and it spawned this incredible reaction with the hashtag #NoSSPTM. People in the community who were just phenomenal came forward, and some really leading lights, like Catherine Austin Fitts, for example, came out and said, this just will not stand. I said it from the beginning. Tonight, you know, as we promised on this program last week, we've kept the closest possible eye on this situation regarding the Secret Space Program trademark by the Sphere Being Alliance group. And tonight, I'm very happy to report that according to their own announcement now to all of their followers here, and I have their statement, they are abandoning the process of attempting to trademark the words secret space program. Now, to be fair to these guys, I'm going to read from their statement what they're coming from. And, you know, we're going to take it in from here, but this is very important because I'm going to explain, as soon as I'm done reading this, what's at stake when a group can come in and trademark a term. And this is a very dangerous situation for any group to have that kind of power. If the precedent was set here, then a group like the TTSA, for example, could come in and trademark a number of other things. You know, they probably trademark UFO and sell it to Lockheed Martin, and that would be the end of the research. But in the case of the secret space program, it's particularly pernicious because the secret space program research has been developed so far, and the question of the missing trillions, and so things that are so important to the community of alternative researchers and alternative, you know, the alternative research community in general. There's just too much at stake in our own research, and that kind of freedom is so crucial, and being censored from material that we've developed is a bridge too far. So we drew a line in the sand, and we told them there wasn't going to be a secret space program trademark. And they hung on really for dear life. And but I think to their credit, they came around, and I'm going to read their own statement, parts of their statement. You know, there's the usual bluster in here about infiltrators and all that kind of stuff, but I'm going to leave that that part of it out and get right to the meat of the action. Quote, and this is Corey Good's statement on the Sphere Being Alliance Facebook page. In an effort to stop the attempts to further divide the community using the topic's trademarks, SBA Media has also made the decision to not pursue the SSP trademark. That's their own statement. Presumably that's Corey Good writing on the Sphere Being Alliance website. And he says, by choosing to not pursue this trademark, it is our hope to offer healing and peace to the current tensions and growing misinformations. Okay, so he always gets his digs in, but there's no misinformation. They were attempting to trademark the SSP Secret Space Program which is not a term that belonged to them in the first place. Corey Goode, of course, came out on the Cosmic Disclosure show with a, his story of being in some program, and the secret space program conferences had been going since 2011. The material since 1992 had been available. Gary McKinnon's story came out in 2002, a real whistleblower who was wanted to be extradited to the United States, and actually came up during a press conference, and you can catch this online, between President Obama and James Cameron. Now, there's a couple more things I want to read here, and then I'm going to get into this term copyright troll and how we all need to become very aware of it, and how this is a great moment where we can all come together and learn something and really, show that when something happens that's out of line in the community of alternative research, whether you're dealing with the UFO file, whether you're dealing with mystery schools, whether you're dealing with New Age topics, that there is a boundary that cannot and will not be crossed. And I think that's absolutely important. And I think, whenever a group backs off of a reckless action, that the group should be applauded for it. But what's very important is that the community itself stands up to those groups, and we can see the great action that can take place when that actually is going on. Okay, a little more from these guys. We hope a clear understanding of our future plans and intention has a calming effect on those in the community. We hope the gesture of abandoning our rights to the SSP trademark is one that can encourage healing and unification in our community. Good, good. I think that abandoning the trademark, which was unethical and was reckless, is a wise thing to do. And I think that in this case, we absolutely agree. I think that by abandoning your rights to the SSP trademark, which you didn't have any rights to it, and it was a wrong thing to try to trademark that term. And I feel like you guys coming forward and saying that, and that you're doing it to encourage healing and unification in your community. All right. That was the right thing to do. That was the right thing to do. And my feeling is that, interestingly enough, by this overreach, the whole community is informed now around this trademark copyright issue and how it can be used to actually block the flow of actual, real, true research into these things, and how, things can be drifted off into fantasy narratives or comic books or whatever, and we lose the real thrust and meaning of the great research. Now, they mentioned that they have great disappointment that they have to choose to cancel their event in Boulder, and they're going to reschedule it for the movie that they have. And, good luck. Good luck, because that, I'm sure the timing is not so great, but it just so happened that you guys try to trademark the SSP. So the fact that they've gone and abandoned their effort to do this and stated it publicly, I think is a very good step. Okay, let's look here. And by the way, the people who have brought a lot of this to bear also on the no SSP trademark effort is absolutely, there's just a group of people that were very active in public and behind the scenes and working very hard to make sure that this did not stand and that the community had access to this important term and this important research, and it wasn't locked up. And one of the reasons is, there are precedents set when somebody trademarks, and there's a number of cases that I've been reviewing as we've had some of the best legal people talking to us about this. One of the cases that I was looking into had to do with a group that had done a similar thing. They'd actually kind of copywritten this term and trademarked it. And what happened was they turned around and sold the term to a larger corporation who locked it down. And it wasn't related to the space program, but it was a different style of research. But this is the threat, which is once the corporate takeover of a particular topic becomes important, that they can kind of basically hide disclosure behind a patent wall, patent and trademark wall. And that's just as dangerous as somebody blocking it with the wall of secrecy relating to the UFO file or breakthrough energy or any of these. So you can see how crucial this is. And one of the things that I want to point out is the arrogance of this kind of thing has to be shut off and cut off at the pass, because, you know, it's such a great thing that everyone came together this week to do that. And but it has to be kept in mind and borne in mind that when these things happen, that are overreaches, that are aggressions, you know, that we have to be there to counteract a threatening hand. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, especially with people sometimes in the alternative community. You know, they're looking for a way away from the craziness of the media and the mainstream media, and away from, you know, kind of a more peaceful search for higher vision. And I share that vision with you. But there are times, like when drug dealers move into your communities, that you can't ignore it, and you have to stand up. And we have, thankfully, some fantastic people who have stood up. And you know, Gigi Young is in the audience tonight, and she's one of them. But you know, Gigi also, last year when we were having so many problems with the same group, she also was one of those people who stood up, and really when a lot of other people were not, because of that nature of the that end of the spectrum of the alternative research community, dealing with, you know, kind of higher vibration topics and dealing with spirituality. And quite understandably, I understand that they don't want to get into you know, just battles with people, but there are times when you need to stand up. And Gigi showed that to us incredibly last year, and again just as recently as yesterday, posting her disapproval of this idea of the alternative research community becoming a briar patch of weird trademark claims. And she was absolutely right. And thank you, Gigi. Great job. Now, Catherine Austin Fitts is someone else who, you know, Catherine, having been the former Assistant Secretary of Housing under the first Bush administration, and having done work for the Clinton administration HUD, and having been kind of a Wall Street, you know, big wheel before that, she's brought some of the most important research around the secret space program to this community. And think of the bravery, you know, think of the incredible business and political contacts that this woman has cultivated over a number of years, and her bravery in saying that these missing trillions that she's been investigating for over 2 decades. And by the way, when you hear that term, missing trillions, you should think of the work of Catherine Austin Fitts, because she's the one who's put 2 decades into that, along with Professor Mark Skidmore, who came along more recently. When you hear that term, if somebody says there's $21 trillion missing, we didn't get that just out of the blue. And somebody just, you know, turning on a podcast or something and talking about it, remember the roots of it are based on 2 decades of work by Secretary Fitts. So Catherine came forward and she said that she was very supportive about the effort, and she said that she wanted us all basically to learn about the copyright troll and how important it was to stand up to this and how vital it was. And I really salute her efforts. Of course, Dr. Joseph Farrell came forward from all the work that he's been doing. And he came out and said we have to fight the trademark. So this was a unanimous effort. And, you know, my own feeling about it was that it was an incredible overreach, but what was so gratifying, I guess, in looking at this clash was that people in the alternative research community would not put up with it. They just weren't going to have it. I mean, it was not going to happen. And that's great to see, because we have a lot of things at stake. You know, I like to do my research in my own time, and I know people like to do their own thing, but once in a while, we have to get together to really put down a menace, you know, and especially when it comes to censorship around a very, very important topic. And we can also remember this, which is, you know, very often we might funnel frustration at a particular group or whatever, but there's always a larger hand back there that's pushing that kind of division. And we've seen groups like the CIA actually involved in pushing these kinds of narratives. And the CIA is openly involved with the TTSA and the Tom DeLonge group. You know, we run the same risk with them and the trademark aspect, the copyright aspect, them trying to dominate a space by going around the UFO community with just a few cronies, putting out Luis Elizondo out there, who's a counterintelligence agent. whose story about being part of the ATIP program does not add up, because as I've shown in my research, in 2010, he was running a shipping company in Missouri. He was not in Washington running the aerospace identification threat program. So, add those things up. But that whole thing, which is a lot more money behind it than anything like what we're talking about here, they just claimed 37 million in losses. There's big money behind that program, and we should use this as a standard bearer, as a line in the sand. So when they come in with big money and they really try this big push, and they're bribing people, basically, I mean, maybe not outright, but sort of bribing them with, you're going to be in our documentary or whatever, that there's a real firm line that says you're not going to take these issues away from us because they're too important. And I think that's crucial. And as I move to read this copyright troll information, I'm going to check with Miss Olivia to see how we're doing out there.
We're doing great. What's interesting is Breakaway Civilization said, what if I trademarked Breakaway Civilization? LOL, just kidding. And of course, we found out that there was a discussion about possibly trying to
Apparently there was some other activity around Breakaway Civilization by a group that was not associated with the alternative research world. And you see how open to everything is. Now let's get this clear. Trademarks, and this is important because in Corey Good's thing, he's always saying, well, when they're not calling me a CIA agent or an Air Force guy or vampire eyes, I guess I have vampires.
And teeth.
Oh, yes, and teeth. How do you like that? Do you think I have vampire eyes?
No.
Oh, okay, I don't think so.
You have kind eyes.
Oh, that's nice. I will say this, that they dug up, what's so great when people try to do attacks on me, they're always like, one of the greatest attacks was this one, which is, they found this picture of me when I was working in a more corporate job, and they said, my God, he's been working in corporate America for over a decade. They brought this picture out, which is hilarious.
Handsome.
And I said, this is the thing. Yes, I confess I worked in corporate America. It's true. I worked for a paycheck. God, throw me on the mercy of the court. I really, it's a hard thing to admit that you worked for a living. But the stories were getting pretty good there. And I was like, one of the great things about this break in the no SSPTM effort is that, those guys, look, they can save their energy. They don't have to decide if I'm an Air Force guy, if I'm a CIA guy, if I'm a vampire, if I'm a corporate America Titan. One of their posters had me leading Gaia TV. Okay, so it was just going to go on and on. So look, they've spared themselves a lot of time now. They don't have to run around and think these things up. So it's a win-win if you can look at it that way. But I do think...
Wait, I got to interrupt you.
Yes. Yeah.
So Brian says, Derek Zoolander, eat your heart out. Great.
Hey, look, when I look back on all my time in corporate America, I think it helps, and it informs the kind of work I do now, because I understand that environment. And I think that's a crucial thing, which is there's a lot of people who come out against the media who don't understand what happens inside those circles, and how a lot of those people in the media are under pressure. And that if you don't go along with the pressure, when you go up to that level of a story and you say, I want to pursue this story on HUD fraud, for example, and the editor says, you're not going to pursue that story, and they just look at you, that's it. I don't care how much integrity you have as a reporter. At that point, if you disobey the editor, you're out. So it's the structure of the media. When we look at this, it is that, what I call the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, control of the media, and how the media has really become the state media. So when you walk into that environment, either you kowtow to what's going on there, or you're out. That's all there is to it. No fancy parties, no big money, no TV shows. You're gone. Just ask Phil Donahue, who had a show in 2003, and he was against the Iraq War on MSNBC. And, MSNBC is supposed to be the big liberal thing. But remember, GE set them up, and they're huge war profiteers. So he was out. They were just like, hey, we'll pay you. We'll pay you to get rid of you. A couple of things that came up in the news before we switch out here is, Megyn Kelly was let go by NBC News for, what they were saying were racial comments. And So a lot of boo-hoo there. She leaves with $70 million. Okay. Do you see how wise we have to get to the kind of power and clout that the mainstream media has versus our circle of alternative media, and why the things that we have in the alternative space need to be guarded very heavily, and there cannot be a kind of mamby-pamby attitude when a threat arrives. We can't say, oh, I'm too spiritual or I'm too much of a light person to engage in, chatter. No, you stand up. You have beliefs. You're a human being. There is a point where you draw a line in the sand. And I think if we have a fundamental line in the sand when it comes to important issues, there's a great quote actually from Rudolf Steiner that I've always kept in mind, which is that, and Steiner, of course, led anthroposophy, the spiritual science movement, and through to 1925. But his great quote, which has always stayed with me, is sometimes the most spiritual word that you can utter is no. No is a very important word because it lets the people that you're dealing with, or the groups that you're dealing with, or the forces that you're pitted against, it lets them know where you stand, but it also lets you know where you stand. And I think in microcosm and macrocosm, in a personal situation or in a larger group setting, you have to be able to stand up and say no when there's something in your field of vision, when there's something, just like we do with the mainstream media. And in this case, with the trademark case on the secret space program, look, the secret space program forms the heart of where the X technology is going, which is what my X series is all about. By the way, we're going to get to as much of the X steganography around the secret space program tonight as we can. We have Walter Bosley joining us. And now he's going to be joining us at 9 p.m. Eastern. So we're going to get as much in as we can. Because of all this breaking news, if we don't get it all in, I will come back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. I'll check in with Miss Olivia. We'll see how much energy she's got. How are your questions going on?
It's going actually it's much quieter than last week.
Fantastic.
I'm much more in control.
Yes. Well, you're watching the Dark Journalist show, and we're in an interesting space here, because when we have a threat around the secret space program and the research that we're doing on it, we're going right to the core of what we're studying in dark journalism. Because when we get into issues about hidden government power and hidden sources behind walls of secrets, then you can really bet that advanced technology going into space and the space economy forms a fundamental core of that research. And anytime there's an attempt to block it, watch closely, because there's something up in that. Now, I'm going to go and read this. This has to do with what Catherine Austin Fitts wanted to pass along to us, and I think it's worth looking at regarding copyright trolls. Now, there's a number of different ways we can look at this kind of material, which is that, sometimes just regular trademark issues show up and it's not organized. But when they're organized and people look at it, it's kind of like a copyright mafia. Is a good way, I think, to put it. But here's a couple of cases that came up. This one's called the Righthaven case. In 2010, copyright holding company Righthaven LLC was called a copyright troll by commentators after it purchased copyrights to a number of old news articles from Stevens Media. At the time, the publisher, the Las Vegas Review-Journal, based on a business model of suing bloggers and other internet authors for statutory damages for having reproduced the articles on their sites without permission. This is kind of the cover of it. Hey, we have a reason. The matter was covered by the LA Times, Bloomberg News, Wired, Mother Jones, the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Herald, and other newspapers, as well as the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, which is crucial and plays a great role in digital media, which offered to assist the defendants. The paper's competitor, the Las Vegas Sun, covered 107 of the lawsuits as of September 1, 2010, describing it as the first known instance of a copyright troll buying the rights to a news story based on finding that its copyright had been infringed. The Review-Journal's publisher responded by defending the lawsuits and criticizing the Sun for covering them. Okay. In August 2010, the company entered an agreement with WEHCO Media in Arkansas to pursue similar actions and announced that it was in negotiation with a number of other publishers. Wired magazine activity is borrowing a page from the patent trolls and noted that the company was demanding $75,000 from each infringer and agreeing to settlements of several $1,000 per defendant. So let me translate that down into our SSP story. A group comes along and trademarks the SSP story, and they copyright and trademark it, and then they turn over to this other corporation and they buy it. Now, the other corporation, for some reason, wants to get rid of the term SSP or secret space program. All they have to do is slap these lawsuits on everybody saying, we own the patent, we own the copyright and the trademark, and you're out. And you, an independent blogger out there, do you have thousands of dollars to engage in legal matters? I think it's a very fragile situation. So you can see how serious it gets when we get into this. Okay, just a little bit more from the actual case. In April 2011, a Colorado case, Colorado court ruled in Whitehaven versus Hill, which is the name of the case. It's very important, and I suggest everyone study it. Quote, although a plaintiff's business model relies in large part upon reaching settlement agreements with a minimal investment of time, effort, the purpose of the courts is to provide a forum for the orderly, just, and timely resolution of controversies. Plaintiffs' wishes to the contrary, the courts are not merely tools for encouraging and exacting settlements from defendants cowed by the potential costs of litigation and liability. This is law that's been established as a result. In other words, translating to our situation, when you slap a legal letter and bring Jason Rice, who was the Gaia, the new Gaia guy, which is where all this came from, apparently, how we found out about it. He's the new guy on the block, and he's telling his story. So he gets slapped with this thing. And the idea is that, Jason Rice is coming out, or anybody, with their own story. Do they want to go to court? Do they, if I'm doing the SSP research, or suppose somebody has a small little blog, I'm lucky enough to have pretty robust legal resources, but let's say somebody's doing a blog and they don't. Well, that's pretty interesting because somebody can just say, hey, stop doing SSP, here's your legal letter, and you're done. Are you going to go into court and pay your lawyer $800 an hour to fight these guys to defend your blog? I mean, hopefully some people can do that. But the legal aspect of copyrights and trademarks and copyright trolling has to be understood, especially in the field that we're in now that we see, in this case, it's a great snapshot for all of us. And like I said, even for the people who came and did the overreach, when looking at this group, wherever their motivations were coming from, we've learned a lot now about what can happen and how we need to come together fast and really resolute and not monkey around with maybe this, maybe that. Just have a real line in the sand that says no one's going to copyright these terms that we use in the alternative community. Now, a person trademarking things, and I have all kinds of trademarks for different things, but my trademarks are based on my own intellectual property. So, my name, Dark Journalist, that's a trademark thing. And, just like when they do these different things with their companies, that's a lot different than stealing something that belongs to a community. So the trademarks aren't bad. Copyrights aren't bad. We need that in order to protect our own intellectual property. But when somebody reaches into your pocket and starts grabbing your intellectual property from things that you study, that other people already came along. It's like if somebody came along and said, well, I really like this idea of Roswell and Area 51, and I'm going to just roll in there and buy these patent trademarks, and you can't say it anymore. This is how absurd the nature of the situation was, and it's very important when this copyright troll thing comes up. I want us to really, as a group in the alternative research community, understand the fundamentals have changed, and now it's all about the financial, legal resources and money that can shut down small bloggers or can shut down, anyone doing a podcast or a show or even a successful show, because they have a legal, robust legal team that can just shut these people down. This case, Whitehaven versus Hill, is a great example. So there's a little kind of addendum at the end that says, by the second half of 2011, defendants with resources to fight Righthaven in court were winning cases on grounds that their usage fell within the fair use doctrine. How many times did that come up on YouTube? And that Stevens Media had actually not assigned full ownership of the copyrighted material to Righthaven. Righthaven was also sanctioned by at least one judge for failing to disclose that Stevens Media got a 50% cut of any lawsuit proceeds involving the Review Journal. Successful defendants demanded court costs, legal fees, and Righthaven refused to pay. By December 2011, what an incredible case. And it goes so deep, and I have to wrap this up, but Righthaven was insolvent and on the auction block by the end of this. The trick failed. Everybody got wise to it, thank God. The courts got wise to it. They figured out what they were doing was actually a marketing scam, and we see our own marketing scam. So we have to be very, very on top of that kind of thing. Now, since I mentioned marketing there, I just want to go into this briefly, which is that, I spent a lot of time looking at the question of the marketing that goes on in the alternative space. And there's so many great ideas that we develop and the great researchers have put forward, whether it's relating to these various spaces that have to do with alternative thinking and independent media, political ideas, geopolitical ideas, personal health ideas, whatever it happens to be. And so all that falls under this umbrella that needs to be protected. Now, marketing groups, and we've seen them, they come in, and some of the marketing groups that I've studied, what they do is they place a grid across any area that they're going into. I don't care if it's computers, video games, automotives. I mean, it can be anything. But when they come into the alternative independent media, what they do is they check off and apply a grid across the front of it. And the grid says, this community is interested in X, 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 and X. And they just check them off, So like the deep state, boom, they're interested in that. Antarctica mysteries, boom, they're interested in that. And they can apply that grid and then superimpose it and then come up with material based around it, which is largely plagiarized or pilfered from other groups who do real research. And they can kind of recycle it into this mush and monetize it. So that's the real threat with the alternative community, which is being saturated by that kind of marketing. So we have to learn to trust the sources of where we get the information. I've pointed out over and over again on this program some of the great sites that we have and the great people working in the community. ForbiddenKnowledgeTV.net is one of them, Solari.com, Joseph P. Farrell's site. And, what we're doing with Dark Journalist, we have to learn to get behind and support the important, life-giving, the things that make our lives quality. And, when we get into a lot of the circusy stuff and it takes away from the real research that's going on, we should have a little thing in there that says, there's only so much of entertainment when it comes to this, right? Is that it?
Yes, and I wanted to mention what David Jasek said, which is we have Corey to thank for all this love fest uniting the alternative research community. And I think that is ironically true.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I am actually very grateful.
No question about it. Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that we all can learn. Like I said, it's a win-win in that sense, which is people who overreach can learn what happens and that there is a resolute community. But the most important thing is that the community is resolute, because when they're not, anything can happen and anything goes, and precedents can be set that, once the camel gets the nose inside the tent, it's all over, right? So we really, we have to be maybe a little more vigilant on that tip. There's no question about it. There's a series of groups that do things along that line. And what we need is just transparency in relation to it. I think that's the best way to look at it. Now, I'm going to kind of pivot here into what the Secret Space program is all about. I am going to do a shout out at the second half of this show to all the great people who got together and did this. And I really want everyone to support them and just to appreciate their work, and that they, when we do have these types of affronts that happen, it's important to see who stands up, because, you need guts. I can tell you as a reporter over a series of years, everything from corporations to millionaires to investment companies that didn't want me looking into their stuff, it's a tricky time for journalism. There's no question about it, especially real journalism when you're trying to actually get something done. And it's important to get behind the people who are doing that, because it's not easy, and they do put themselves in the line of fire. And, they have to have a kind of belief that the truth wins out. And I certainly do have that kind of belief. And I think, when we get a victory for the community, it's important. But like I said, I think everyone comes out a winner in this. So I think from every perspective, we've all learned something incredibly valuable. Now, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. I want to suggest everyone go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for the newsletter, because the truth is that's how we stay in touch. And what's interesting there is there's so many shutdowns going on. Think about, we have this stress and hassle in the alternative research community. Check out what happens from the mainstream level. They're just getting rid of accounts, destroying Twitter followers, clearing YouTube accounts out that they don't agree with, and it's not even for any extreme reasons. They just get rid of like these libertarians. They got rid of the Ron Paul Institute. I mean, it's really quite the crackdown. Yes, Ms.
Right.
Lily.
And what did we find out about Cliff High today?
Yes, right. They're taking away a lot of his.
He has subscribed to
to ours. Yes.
And he has been dismissed or unsubscribed.
This is an
15 times.
This is interesting. People will sign up for Dark Journalist, and this is especially true since the X series started. And they email me all the time that YouTube automatically unsubscribed them after a couple of weeks. And they're like, what's going on here?
We lose 1/3 of our new subscribers.
It's fascinating.
They
unsubscribe them. So it's a very strange algorithm that they put in place around people who challenge the mainstream narrative. Now, I've put this across before, but I never tire of saying, when it comes to dark journalism, here's what it is. I applied a simple formula, and it always, whenever a major deep event comes up, this scenario always plays out. Dark journalism is really simple. Here's what dark journalism is. There's an official story that is usually put in place to protect the political institutions and more. We've heard the official story, like the 2008 financial crash was just a few bad actors and subprime loans, which has nothing to do with any of it. All the way back, the JFK assassination. The official story is that Oswald was this mastermind who arranged this whole assassination with an old gun that didn't fire, and he wasn't even in the 6th floor at the time. So no, none of those stories, these are the official stories. And underneath that is the counter story. And the counter story is very important because we get the best kind of researchers, people I respect and admire, and who've really kind of been mentors to me in their work, like Peter Dale Scott, professor at UC Berkeley, who coined the term the deep state. You see everyone using this term willy-nilly now. A lot of people throwing around the term have no idea what it means. And whenever I listen to them, I find it quite humorous, because having spent time on Professor Peter Dale Scott's work, having talked to him, spent hours speaking with him, I understand what deep state means because he coined it. So this is important, fundamental, core research in the alternative community. But it is fascinating because when we look at terms like this, it's very important. We learn that words are very important, and the way that they're applied is very important. So when we see catchy headlines about Nibiru crash or deep state tribunals and Gitmo and stuff, it is flimsy. That's flimsy reporting, I would say. We're in a much better scenario when we're getting the good stuff. And you get that in that second level of dark journalism. Okay, so the first level is the official story. The second level is the counter story, very often called the conspiracy theory by the media, because they don't like it when these professional, professors and writers and researchers do this. I think of Jefferson Morley, who used to work for the Washington Post, and now he's taken the CIA to court because of the amount of lies that they have relating to the JFK case 50 years ago. I mean, this is how deep it goes, and he's still suing them for records, and that's records that they haven't included. They're not even included in the rolling releases that the Trump administration is doing about the JFK assassination right now. Okay, but here's my favorite level and that we deal with all the time in the alternative media, and that is level 3. Okay, so the first level is the official story. The second level, the counter story, called the conspiracy theory by the media, and then junk conspiracy. Junk conspiracy is the plague of the independent media. It's also quite amusing in a way that this comes up because over and over again we run through these stories. We're stuck in the same morass with the same strange thing. You know, cabal arrests are coming. There's a famous Asian family that's going to save everyone. There's a flat Earth. You know, just real junk conspiracy over and over again. And this is very interesting because, of course, some of it is organic, no question about it. But a lot of it, when you get right down to it, is placed there on purpose in order for people to look at the alternative media and think, you know, this story's crazy. You know, I'm going to go back to the official story. So they're trying to blur the second story, which is the counter story people, like the professors and the writers and the researchers who question the official story. And they're trying to tar them with this brush of junk conspiracy. We live in an environment of junk conspiracy in the independent media. All the stuff relating to these different movements that we've covered, you know, people just showing up on Mars and being galactic ambassadors and all this kind of stuff, it falls right into that junk conspiracy category. And, you know, when you get people wasting time that could be spent grabbing after really good ideas, there's so many important ideas, as we cover in the X series, like the mystery schools, for example. And the X series has to do with steganography. So there's a whole category opening up there. It's like a key to how these different government agencies have hidden projects over the years. It's an incredible Rosetta Stone for that process and leads us all the way back to the mystery schools. So here we are in a very, very different environment. But the junk conspiracy I want to identify, because what happens is that junk conspiracy, by kind of spoiling the one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. You know, it spoils the environment and it creates this atmosphere where people looking into it are like, you know, I liked this information until that crazy thing came up. Now I'm out of here. And so they go back to the official story and we see it over and over again.
Well, and there's also the temptation. The junk conspiracy is oftentimes more enticing,
flashy,
more sexy,
Flash
and glamorous.
Gordon.
Yeah.
Aliens in swimsuits and Flash Gordon laser guns. I'm going to tell you something. In looking at these stories, really, the true stuff is way more fascinating. Way more fascinating. And the other stuff is kind of like going to Kentucky Fried Chicken or something. You know, maybe if you're hungry, it seems like a good idea in the moment, but it's a horrible experience afterwards, as we all know. Okay, so let's take a look at a category and apply the dark journalist rules over the secret space program and see what we come up with. The secret space program, in my opinion, was first, I have an actual document that came out in 2014, which I have here, on Blue Gemini. And in X steganography, Blue Gemini comes up a lot because Blue Gemini is the first program where the secret space program came in. And the idea was that Blue Gemini and its successors, like Dinosaur and the X-15, and we've gotten some confirmation of this from people like Philip Corso on the X-15 especially, were there for UFO recon. So the idea is that they were building this particular program to keep an eye on this stuff that was flying around in our skies, you know, and I apply the blanket category UFO file to that stuff. So when I say UFO file, it's just all of that. Now, they had a few different problems with the UFO file. One of the problems, which I've pointed out, which slowly but surely I think is penetrating through to different researchers, it's this idea of apotheum. Apotheum is the effect that happens when these craft show up. And this is the main struggle, the kind of main issue that goes on in the mind of the people who keep, you know, what they call the silencers, and what I call X-Protect. The biggest reason for that wall of secrecy is because of this apotheum effect. It's not just we're hiding the biggest secret on Earth. That's pretty big. Yeah, hiding off-world civilizations visiting here. That's a big deal. That's one kind of secrecy and one kind of lying. But hiding apotheum is crucial because apotheum introduces a kind of physics that we don't know anything about. So in simple cases, when we hear things about UFO cases, we get this whole thing about, well, I had missing time, well, my car stopped, well, I found myself floating down the highway, well, I found my car floating up into a ship. You know, they're very unusual things that take place. People going through walls and stuff. I mean, if I was part of a group, off-world civilization, coming to abduct people, that's pretty handy ability to just make everything, you know, transparent so I can move in and out of walls and all the rest of that. However, how is it done with any concept of technology that we have? So these stories, and there's so many of them, if we're to take it seriously, they're introducing a secondary physics. That's what apotheum is. And we have the Xxxi leading us through the mystery schools talking about this effect. And the effect itself comes up not only in relation to the UFO file, but it comes up in stories relating to ancient technology. So that's something that we've tracked through some 30-odd episodes of the X series. And what we find is the apotheum effect is so disturbing to people who keep things like nuclear secrets and keep things like advanced technology secret, that they don't control it exactly. They don't know all the extent of it. And the problem is, when they look at that, it's incredibly dangerous from their perspective because they don't have their claws in it. So the kind of smackdown that you see when it comes to people looking for records about UFO cases or advanced military projects goes far beyond what would just be normal secrecy. I mean, I think we see a real effort to change people's thinking about it as well. So we have to kind of tie these things together. Now let's think of the secret space program. The secret space program was first noticed, and I've done deep research on this. It was first noticed in 1961 by these two people, President John Kennedy and Robert McNamara. McNamara wrote a very important briefing, and Kennedy followed up on it and did a very unusual thing in relation to NASA and the military. I'm going to tell you about it in just a minute. But first, I'm going to go to this quote that has to do with Blue Gemini and Dinosaur, which were the program. It's DYNASOAR. It's kind of an odd play on words. But there were a number of things about space that they were getting their hands on. And this also gets us into continuity of government programs, which is where the secrecy around the secret space program comes from. It's crucial to understand continuity of government COG in relation to the secret space program. And what I always tell people in relation to this is that the SSP is COG. It's the exact same program. Continuity of government program is to set up a secondary government in the event that the regular government is taken out by a nuclear strike or whatever. They run in bases underground. This thing was started in the 50s when we really were advancing on the nuclear front. Of course, we're way beyond anything like nuclear now, even though they talk about it like it's a new nuclear arms race. And we have really kind of sad stories coming out that the Trump administration, unfortunately, under the watchful eyes of John Bolton, is trying to dismantle the Reagan-era Soviet nuclear treaties, which is absurd. And Bolton, let's do President Trump a favor and do a letter-writing campaign. Get rid of Bolton. He's a Bush hack. He's Bush's man, ambassador to the United Nations, and he is the pits. He's a neocon. And I'll remind everyone, you're watching Dark Journalist here. It's a very eventful night. We're going to have Walter Bosley coming up. And Bosley, just with his Empire of the Wheels series, we did the Secret Space Program conference together. He's one of the presenters, along with Dr. Joseph Farrell, the late, great Jim Mars. And, Linda Moulton Howe, Catherine Austin Fitz, a real brain trust, Dr. Joseph Farrell, Paul Violette. I mean, just an incredible group. But one thing that's great about Bosley is I've noticed that he goes underground and he does his research. He's a real investigator, and he's been a private eye, and he's also been in the military and in Air Force. And he really, this is the kind of guy who goes underground, does the research, and comes back with something really phenomenal. So I highly recommend his Empire of the Wheels series. He's going to be joining us in about a half hour here. And of course, we started off the show with the incredible news that the Sphere Being Alliance, Corey Good group were going to abandon their efforts to trademark the secret space program. And we welcome their statement saying that they were going to abandon that. And of course,
Are you going to address how that came about at all?
well, I think that that's a lot of that is internal, but I am going to say that there are some very valuable people doing that, and something that I think is fascinating, and somebody I do want to give a shout out to and really kind of applaud their own bravery, because it's funny when you get into this and there are different people working for different types of media groups, and sometimes you don't land on the same side, that's for sure. But I do want to say that Teresa Narrows, who really has worked off and on with Corey Good's people, and famously did an interview with Corey Good's wife. Teresa is an extraordinary journalist in her own right, and she really, I think, showed a lot of bravery today by tweeting out the no SSP TM and trying to get them to see the error, because it's disaster for them as well, moving in and trying to trademark these things. So I think it's very valuable that she did that. And, I want to say that, this is no Corey's kid. I mean, that this is a real independent force of her own. And, I have a great deal of respect for the work that she does, and for her to tweet that out today, really in public in the middle of all this, took incredible courage. And I want to say that, Teresa, we're all very thankful for your courage on that. And I know that you have the best in mind for moving the subjects forward that we're talking about here. And you're a welcome voice in all of this work. But I would also say that, there are people who are in these groups and they don't show that kind of courage. And, it's an interesting thing because it's a situation that feeds on itself. And I want to make an interesting observation here, which is, from my own analysis and my own research around the independent media, I feel that women in general need to come forward and have a stronger presence and a bigger voice. And they need also to stand up and take action when they're bullied by, men who have these groups or have power who come in. Women have a more well-developed intuition. They understand emotions a lot better. And they really, since we're getting into alternative areas, very often, sure, some of it's scientific, but a lot of it deals with a heart-centered approach also, and understanding, holistic. That's really the term for a lot of the things that we're after. When you get into the mystery schools, there's the great background of the goddess traditions informing that, really plugging in the wisdom. So women, I think, need to take a stronger role. And I think men in the alternative space need to make room for that. And also, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of cleanup time, I think, in the alternative space that could be good. And of course, you won't get it in the mainstream media, because of where they're coming from. But I think we have a chance to do that. And for the men, I want to say this, I think we should clean up the rap style language around these things too, and really respect the women that are in these fields for the work that they do. And, we've come a long way, baby, right?
Yeah, well, we could say that really the problems that we are experiencing on the planet as a whole is because women put up with too much.
That's fascinating. This is something that Catherine Austin Fitts talks about as well, which is quite interesting. And of course, we have the lovely Olivia, so we have a living, breathing example of that kind of wisdom, and she does an incredible job, as we know. But I do think that's important. Okay, so all of this swirling around Blue Gemini, I'm going to explain it this way. What happens is John F. Kennedy, as president, tries to figure out what the hell is going on. Because when he gets in, President Eisenhower says to him, look, there are programs going on that I can't get a handle on. And one of them is the UFO file. But the work that they're doing at these bases, I've had to threaten them with military activity in order to get a handle on it. So Kennedy's briefed. Kennedy understands a great deal from his association with people like James Forrestal, who was the Secretary of Defense, first Secretary of Defense, who was unceremoniously thrown out of a window, apparently because of his opposition to certain things in the Majestic group, dealing with the UFO file. Kennedy at a certain point suggests to McNamara that it's very odd that there's a whole entire space apparatus around this program of Blue Gemini that he doesn't seem to have any handle on. And it all is coming out of NASA and Werner von Braun, who's one of the Nazi paperclip scientists that we brought over here. Now, von Braun had his control team, and we've done a series of interviews with Dr. Joseph Farrell about this influence at NASA at that point. And I think it's quite pertinent to what we're talking about, because the only reason you get a secret space program is the same reason you get this continuity of government program. The continuity of government program and how it relates to the secret space program is very simple. This idea of a strike that would destroy the leadership caused the idea to say, look, we need something underground that's set up, that's in these bunkers in case nukes fly, and you need a whole secret government down there. But over the years, they started to get more and more control, and they're largely CIA-based operational personnel. So what happened at a certain point is their budget got written off because it was so secret. And they've only been brought up once in Congress, and that was during Oliver North's testimony. And Oliver North was giving testimony relating to continuity of government, which was the channels he used when he funneled all this money to Iran, which was a phony deal. And, all of this money and all the fraud went off the charts, and it's never been explained. But a lot of that money went into this space program. Now, one of the things about continuity of government that I think is important to point out is that continuity of government existed in such secrecy, and they had such cover because they were trying to hide from the Soviets and different nuclear powers who would be in charge, what their government would be. So they had the perfect cover in a sense. But one of the things in Professor Peter Dale Scott's research that he's pointed out over and over again is that the continuity of government program personnel always showed up in the deep events of American history, like Oliver North, who dealt with continuity of government under President Reagan, like John Dean, who worked for the continuity of government program before becoming a key figure in the Watergate scandal, like the Secret Service agent who set up President Kennedy's trip to Dallas. Quite unusual. They're all associated with continuity of government. So it's like a separate channel of government that's operative there. But let me introduce two other people in there. Donald Rumsfeld, the youngest and oldest, well, he may not have been the oldest, actually, Secretary of Defense, but Secretary of Defense under Ford and Secretary of Defense some 25 years later under Bush 1. Now, when Reagan was setting up continuity of government in the 80s, he called in Rumsfeld and he called in Dick Cheney. Now, Cheney was a congressman in Wyoming at the time. He did not have the, he didn't become defense secretary until Bush 1. But what's really interesting is that Donald Rumsfeld, who I said was the Secretary of Defense under two different presidents, he actually was the CEO of a chemical company. And the chemical company is the same company that brought us aspartame. How do you like that one, Miss Olivia?
Don't get me started.
So, he had no role in government, but here he is setting out what will happen in the event of a nuclear attack and setting up a whole alternate government. And where was the government? Underground. Well, we have all this information about underground bases, all this missing money about underground, this and that. And then we start to wonder, that's all under continuity of government, and we don't know anything about it. It can't even be mentioned in congressional hearings, as we found out with Oliver North.
What did we find out about those elevators, that elevator stock?
Yes, well, this is a story that Fitz tells, which is that someone came to her who was a stock investor, and he said, it's great. Once I found your work, I understood so much because, there were all these incredible elevator companies that were making these profits. And I was like, they're not doing it through, making elevators for skyscrapers. Where are they getting the money? And he said, as soon as you mentioned the underground bases, it all made sense. Everything fell into place. Mm-hmm. It's quite amazing, actually, because there's a whole shadow economy that goes on that's underneath government secrecy. And the kind of money that can be spent can't be checked because except by a very few people inside the program. So it becomes this kind of open door, open invitation to pilfer money, drain money away. And one of the things that Fitz did was she got into tracking where money was missing once they started to announce all this money missing from the Pentagon back in 2001. Now, she's been on that story since 1998. Okay, that's 20 years. And finally, Professor Mark Skidmore came forward and talked to her and looked at it and couldn't believe what she was saying. And he said, I'm going to have my students check it out. And they developed a whole program. And he was shocked to say, you know what, she's right. This $21 trillion is missing. That's $65,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. It's quite remarkable sum of money to just be missing. But it absolutely is missing. And even Forbes, which I think is quite remarkable, acknowledged her and Dr. Mark Skidmore's work. They didn't say it was right, but they said, could this be? You know, it's kind of dangling a carrot out there. And over and over again now, we hear the Pentagon saying that because of operational things that are happening, they can't publish those budgets that they have because it'll show where the money's coming from. One of the programs I want to point out, we did an entire program on it, is something that was originally called the X-35, but now we hear so much about as the F for Frank 35. And this has to do with the invisible plane. Now, there's such a scandal going on about this inside those inner circles, and the media is just starting to catch on it. Now, the X-35 is the X technology developed by Walter Dornberger that we've really outlined in the X steganography shows. I refer you to any of the shows dealing with Blue Gemini or the Secret Space Program or Walter Dornberger, who comes up over and over again, who was really the spectacular star of that whole Nazi scientist team. But we got something going there with the X technology that is unlike anything that has been laid out publicly. It is an entirely private black ops program. So Trump, when he gets into office, he starts running around talking about the F-35, which was directly made from the X-35. It's X-35 technology. They changed it. They kind of changed a little bit of its function, but it basically carries all of the height of what we've developed in the X series. So Trump comes out and he says, hey, we've got invisible planes. It's the F-35. You'll never see it coming. And this incredible consternation from inside the Pentagon saying, hey, get a hold of this guy. And the media's like, oh, Trump is crazy. There goes crazy Trump again, thinking that we have invisible planes. But there's a string of statements over the past 18 months. And Trump, who doesn't like to beat around the bush, he wants to tell these guys, look, we've got invisible technology. You're screwed. And is this the reason why North Korea and some of these other people have come to the table and been like, yeah, we want to talk? Trump has been very much more outspoken about this. But the F-35 and the X-35 are under strange controversy. We did a whole thing about the hat trick, which is part of the interesting logo around the X-35. And the other thing that's interesting is they have a logo of a squid, which we know has all this transparency that goes on. You see right through it. That's a way to kind of keep enemies away. These factors are very interesting, and we're going to be hearing and seeing a lot more about what this is all about. The hidden technology that surrounds the secret space program is the crucial aspect. That's why things like this are very important when they come up, and the smackdown is on in relation to the secret space program. If they can get their handle through groups like the TTSA, if they can get a handle of copyrights, if they can get a handle on the spin of what is happening there in relation to the UFO file and the secret space program. Look, we have had since 1958 an active, actually it's 53, but 58 is when we had things up in space. Okay, so we're talking about 60 some odd years of development. Of course, it's a crucial area. We have space mining going on. We have Elon Musk with his space tourism and going to Mars. There's an entire economy that's being built there that we have to be aware of. And I'm going to tell you, they're going to play it down more and more. One of the things that came up with Trump, since he's the bearer of the X, we have an episode called Trump, Tesla, and the time capsule, which is absolutely crucial information from the X series. And the reason it's important is this. Look, Trump came on strong with this, but what else did he come on strong about? The Space Force. Okay, what is the Space Force? I mean, he comes out and he says, I've directed the Pentagon to develop plans to deploy a Space Force. This is an interesting play on Trump's part, because I can tell you something. They have to vote on that stuff, okay? I mean, let's get real. There's a whole apparatus. The Congress, the House and the Senate have to get together and do that. It's not something that Trump can proclaim with the snap of his fingers. So it was very odd for him to come out and say, hey, I've directed Mattis to go and do this. It relates very strongly to his messaging. He's saying, I know about this technology. I know about the space program aspect, and you can't keep me as president from it. Well, there's another president who said that, and that was JFK. So it's quite interesting. They both have had tremendous problems with what? The Central Intelligence Agency. And even in this whole mail bombing scare that came up, and they said, this guy is a Trump-style bomber, dude. What's remarkable, I think, about all that is simple. When we look at people who come forward and do this, who are they aiming at, right? So they were all Democrats, supposedly. That's one. Two, how do you get CIA directors in there? National Intelligence Director, former National Intelligence Director James Clapper, who lied to Congress famously. And former CIA director, the drone king himself, John Brennan, who now works at MSNBC as a consultant. He's famously the guy who was in charge of Luis Elizondo, who, from the TTSA. So we're dealing with that weird element. But when they come up with these stories about, the pipe instruments, because they can't be called bombs because none of them actually work, it's very odd how they sort of sprinkle in these little CIA directors. So, and I'm glad that nobody got hurt in this story, whatever was going on, of course. But I think it is odd, the people who show up in the middle of these stories over and over again, considering the history. And this is why I think we need to shake the tree on the history front, because the Central Intelligence Agency, by the people who created it there back in 1947, was repudiated after the Kennedy assassination, was sanctioned by Congress and the Senate and the Church Committee in the 70s, and came back strong in the 80s after going offshore and renaming itself the Safari Group and working with foreign governments. So when we get into secrecy, dealing with the secret space program, the CIA is your central figure. It's not the NSA. It's not the FBI, it's the CIA, because they still have this role. But I want to flash back to Kennedy for a minute, because he said, look, to McNamara, if NASA has that program and I can't get info on it, are they flying those things out there? And McNamara produced an entire brief on it, which I have here, and they only released this document in 2014, and it related to this dinosaur and Blue Gemini programs. And they were like, well, what's going on here? It seems to me that there are two space programs. That is the first admission in paper of a secret space program by Robert McNamara in a memo to NASA saying, Kennedy's not happy about this. What are you doing? Kennedy does a very unusual thing because, of course, NASA is not a military outfit. It wasn't designed to be a military outfit, although it's still under the control of the military. Kennedy says, look, I want you to take that program, Blue Gemini, and kick it back under military control, because he figured, at least that's the devil that I know. And the CIA von Braun NASA thing that's running their own show at NASA, he was quite concerned about it. Kennedy was the first one to try to get clarity around the secret space program, and it's in his defense secretary's document asking why there's two space programs. Now, Blue Gemini would go away, would go under, would go black. And then Dinosaur comes up. I'm going to tell you something very strange about this. In a book that was completely unrelated, that was looking at the Jim Garrison investigation, and Jim Garrison was the New Orleans DA who challenged the CIA on their role in clandestine operations and assassinations in relation to the Kennedy assassination. there's a book out there by Bill Simpich that studies the case. There was a very odd chapter in there about somebody named Guy Bannister, I've pointed out in this program over and over again, actually came forward in the 40s and was the X-Files person. He was the one who collected the reports of these saucers, and they put them all under X. That's where we get X. But Guy Bannister turns up in 1963 coaching Lee Harvey Oswald to appear like a communist and infiltrate radical groups in New Orleans. So as Garrison is pouring through this information, he starts to realize there's a weird pattern here. So Guy Bannister, when he died, all of his files got burned and all the rest of it. But it turned out Bill Simpich found that Bannister's wife had kept a list, didn't keep the files, but kept a list of what the files were. And she sold it to a library, oddly enough, and it was still there. And in here, as we can plainly see from his notes, from Guy Bannister's file list is Dinosaur Space Warcraft. This relates to the history of the secret space program. Dinosaur Space Warcraft is a very unusual title. And if you look at this, it's right underneath the assassination of President Kennedy, which is right up here, and that's here. This is Guy Bannister's file operation. Why does he have a file operation about Dinosaur Space Warcraft in relation to the assassination of President Kennedy in his files? That battle, that skirmish, the thing that took place that developed the secret space program that Kennedy dived into in 1961 turns out to be one of the fundamental causes behind the people that are associated with the assassination, i.e. Guy Bannister coaching Oswald in the summer of '63 before the assassination. So people associated around there, look at the name of it, Dinosaur Space Warcraft. That's not the name of the program. It's not called Warcraft. It's called the Dinosaur Program. They're supposed to be out there monitoring space, manned space flights. They were getting into that. Why Warcraft? Well, this is the interesting thing, and this was the clash going on, which was Kennedy's thing was in working with the Russians, there aren't going to be weapons in space. They're going to keep it weapons free. And then he sees there's a weird program that he, as president, can't get a handle on, that he has to send his Secretary of Defense in to shake up the system and say, what is that? Why do we have two space programs? Where'd you get the money for that? What is that? And by the way, the incredible money behind Blue Gemini at the time in the billions is remarkable. I mean, you know, in many ways in the early 60s, there wasn't a lot of money in the budget. So when you see something over $1 billion, it's quite a big item. So this is the roots of where the secrecy behind the secret space program comes from. And we have to be aware of it. Reagan's Star Wars program is the second leg of it. And by the time we get to this period that we're in, there's a vast apparatus in space. And this all relates to the space fence. And the space fence kind of taking the Earth as a grid, basically, is set up around this idea that Lockheed Martin has of like, oh, we're going to control all the junk that's in space. It's so dangerous. We need this incredible apparatus to basically form a gigantic grid around the planet. Now, viewers who are familiar with my work in the X series will think about that eighth sphere and the things that he's talking about from a cosmological point of view. But boy, doesn't that space fence sound like the same exact thing? Amazing. And I want to remind everyone that you're watching Dark Journalists. We had a really kind of an amazing week here. Wouldn't you say, Miss Olivia?
Exhausting.
You did a fantastic job, as you are always doing.
I'm still sleep deprived.
People had a lot on this no SSPTM conversation about the trademark around the secret space program, which is what we're talking about tonight. And we're going to talk a little more about it tomorrow night, I've decided, because we have Walter Bosley coming up in 10 minutes. And tomorrow night, we're going to get a little bit deeper into what's happening now with it, which I think is so crucial. And that show we're going to do at 6 o'clock, and we're just going to do it for an hour and a half tomorrow night, just to finish off what we're doing here. But tonight, you're watching Dark Journalist. And yes, earlier, the Sphere Being Alliance came through with a statement, and I read it here earlier, but in general, what they were saying was that they were abandoning their claim for the SSP secret space program trademark. which I think is absolutely crucial, that the awareness that was raised by the group, which they acknowledged and said that, in order basically to restore harmony and peace, they were going to do this. It's smart, and we know that people who are on their team who did this were doing the right thing, because there was no way that trademark was going to stand. So it was going to be a disaster in any case. So it is interesting, though. I think it's taught us all a lesson about that line in the sand, the copyright trolls, and the things that I've discussed and that we've brought up here really have to be kept in mind. We're in an interesting situation. We're in a different situation than we were, say, 3 years ago. There's a lot more information out about these things. Trump being in office creates a wild card. The CIA openly having to reveal themselves and go after, basically as the titular head of the deep state. They have to go after the presidency in a way that they have not really gone after a president since JFK, and their incredible opposition to him and his ideas doesn't really make sense, because they're not ideological when you think about it. They're not meant to favor Democrats or Republicans. So for them to go hog wild for Trump means that they're out of control. And, we have to remember things in relation to the CIA and why it's important when we spot people from the CIA coming in on the UFO file community. We have to point it out. And Luis Elizondo is a great example. Ron Pandolfi, who was behind a lot of the DeLong stuff before he got out of the picture. Pandolfi is the top scientist for the CIA. Now, you can imagine talking to a top scientist and all the things he must know. You want to talk to the top scientist at the CIA? That's really, really heavy-duty level. But I found other things about Pandolfi also, which is that Pandolfi, fascinatingly enough, was the person who gave the briefing to President Bush on the Iraq War situation. And just think of that kind of authority and how they would trust his perspective on this. This is somebody who's a major intelligence figure. And for him to be there hanging out in the background of the TTSA, the whole situation with the Sphere Being Alliance made me think of the TTSA and how many more resources that they have for coming into the alternative independent world and really gobbling things up and moving people aside that don't agree with them and sizing things up and going over everyone's head and talking to Fox News and saying, like, we've got all this UFO stuff going on, and we're going to sell you T-shirts and dumb you down on it. And by the way, the CIA are heroes; they're great guys, and they've been defending us against these evil threat aliens. And don't worry about the missing trillions, because they've just been taking care of you in the background. Okay, go back to sleep, kids. So that's a real dangerous scenario there with the TTSA, and I think that this situation that came up with Corey Goode and the SBA it's a good thing. We need to be awake. There's been a little bit of not being on top of it, and really people running away with wild stories, ambassadors to the galaxy and stuff. We need to kind of figure out where the groups are that have an interest in exploiting our ignorance about the programs that they've kept secret for years. And as we've seen in the X series, it goes back a long, long way. And that is Walter Bosley. I almost said Dr. Walter Bosley just because it felt like the right thing to say. But you're coming in. Yes.
Am I slanted, or because you're slanted?
You are. It's like a replay. It's like a weird deja vu of last week.
Yeah, I know. It's weird. Hold on. Let me do this.
Yes, sir. So much. Perfect.
There we go.
Hey, now you're talking. Walter, it's great to see you.
Oh, yeah. Good to see you. This is a very interesting day. That's a great discussion subject you were talking about.
Yes.
Before. That's some interesting stuff.
There's no question.
Really interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating because of the brain trust that we have around it, too, like with the work that you've done or Dr. Farrell. These are the things that we want to get to. And the presence, when the junk conspiracy comes in and it wraps us up, it distracts and deflates kind of
right. Which I have to tell you that I am someone who's inclined. Sorry, I'm adjusting here. I'm using an area because of our lack of air conditioning, I'm having to use a different area to be able to, not feel like I'm in a sweatbox. Everything's great right here, though.
No,
I'm
this is
somebody,
perfect.
I'm somebody who has a hard time when people say, "Oh, there's so much going on with the space program and stuff that the president never gets briefed in on about ETs and stuff," and I tend to step back from that, going, come on, guys. Now, however, the thing you were saying about Kennedy, I could see that happening for a time with
Yes.
technology. Yeah. As far as ETs, no, I don't believe it for a second. I think all presidents are. I think that's like, yeah, as we imagine in movies and in conversations. I think that's briefing number one once you're sworn in. It's
Right.
like, guess what? But as far as technology, yeah, I could see, and I could see them playing with corporate proprietary category there to oh, we didn't tell the president about it because it belonged to Boeing, or it didn't belong to the U.S. government at that time. I could see that happening.
What about when the DeLong TTSA group said, we're going to build the first anti-gravity aircraft? Boom. And they were coming up with these figures for it that was like, we'll do it with $50 million. Just like, what are you talking about?
Right. Well, I mean, my whole view of that is I kind of have sympathy. Presently, this is where I'm at with Tom DeLonge. Is I see him as a sympathetic figure. I think that he is definitely sincere and earnest in his interests and in his motivation for envisioning TTSA and coming up with the idea. But I do think he is being used, and this TTSA platform, I've said it before, is being used. He's being used unwittingly by the Intel, DoD types that, are looking to put their spin to protect programs that exist. And I think these things, like, we're going to build this craft for $50 million. I think they just kind of, they let him, when it's him saying it, it's like, let Tom go. He's rolling, kind of like John Belushi in Animal House. He means well, but yeah, it's a joke. There's no way. The irony is maybe they have one already.
Yeah, right.
And TTSA doesn't need to build it, right?
Well, you've done work in intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
You understand that world quite well. When you see somebody like Luis Elizondo step out, what's the first thing that flashes into your mind about the way that they put Elizondo out there as Mr. Threat UFO guy?
Well, I've said it elsewhere. I think I might have said it here too, and I'll keep saying it unless I have a reason to no longer suspect this. I think Mr. Elizondo, when he retired from the CIA, he, emptied his desk on Friday, said, "See you later, guys," and on Monday reported for duty as a contractor. Now I'm truncating that.
Yes.
I see Elizondo as now an operational contractor for the CIA.
Yep.
And I know for a fact they do this.
Got, by the way, go ahead.
Pardon?
The question that he never gets when he does these interviews. He gets all the softball interviews.
Exactly. I'm sure he has a canned answer for it. All of us who have worked in that world have our canned answers to these questions. But when I was in, people say, "Well, how do you know, Bosley?" Well, between the years in FBI and especially when I was in the Air Force, I learned personally and worked with people. When I talk about this operational contractor thing, I'm telling you, it's the real deal. Okay, they do that. Okay, and this is no deep dark secret. Come on, they've been depicting that in movies and stuff for a while. But yeah, and Elizondo fits the model for that perfectly from my experience perspective.
Well, it's interesting, absolutely, and I think you've given great insight on Elizondo, especially when Elizondo will do interviews and they'll say, "Well, tell us about the program," and he will say like, "Well, it was secret and it's not secret," and then he'll say, "Well, it was classified, but actually it was not classified," and like, Well, I was getting directions from the CIA director, and no, he wasn't actually giving me directions.
Yeah, that kind of contradiction. Now, there are aspects of this that could seem contradictory. For instance, sorry, my dog might act up in the background. I apologize. For instance, something can be, if not exactly classified, it can, in the practical application of it, deal with very classified things. Case in point, counterespionage operations.
Right.
It is not classified. It's not a classified secret that the U.S. government, the U.S. military conducts these operations. The specifics of the operations are what's classified, okay? Who the asset is, where they're going, what the passage material, okay? So there's a case of something, well, it's classified, but it's not. It was no secret that I worked for the FBI. Family and friends knew that when I was doing it. Obviously, no secret that I was in the Air Force and I was an OSI agent because I carried a badge and credential and I was walking around with a gun, off base as well as on. People knew that I was an agent. What they did not know were the specifics of what I was doing every day on the casework, particularly when I was at Wright-Patterson, because I was chief of a CE ops branch. And, I got a funny story on that. In my last, I think like maybe 8 or 9 months in the Air Force, I had been at Wright-Patterson, already assigned there almost 3 years. I was in my 3rd year. And we had a base exercise, and I was the one who had to be the OSI commander for the exercise. And so I'm dealing with the security forces commander. He's a colonel. And he says, I've done 2 tours at this base. Are you new? I'm like, no, I've been here a few years. He goes, well, I know all the OSI agents. How come I never met you? And I go, well, sir, I work behind a cipher door in another building. So that, and that's why when people, a lot of times when they attack your bona fides, like there's other FBI guys out there right now that are like on Coast to Coast and on, other shows and stuff. And people, will ask me.
Yeah, he's a guy.
Yeah. They'll say, hey, did you know this guy? And I'm like, well, no, it's a big bureau.
Right.
And, more often what happens is, they'll ask somebody, did you know Bosley? And in several cases, I'll get, I'll hear, oh, I never heard of that guy. And if I never heard of him, he's lying. He's not the real thing. Well, that agent should know better, or he didn't work in what used to be the Foreign Counterintelligence Branch, which is now the National Security Division, because my time working for the FBI, except for, I think, a period of 18 months, I was always working at a undercover offsite, and you only interact with the bureau employees that are part of that undercover offsite, and so there's a lot of people that you don't meet that are in the bureau. What's funny is how many times after I got out of the bureau, when I was an Air Force agent, I would meet FBI agents all over the country, and we would get to talking, and we'd find out that we had worked the same 15-year Cold War operation, but at different times in Manhattan. And, hey, you worked this? Yeah. What years were you on? That kind of thing. So,
wow.
That goes on. But again, I diverted.
No, it's good. It's great. It's great background, because I think we have to understand how those structures work, because we have people just roll out as whistleblowers, and that gives us an opportunity here to just talk about whistleblowers real briefly. Well, I want to remind everyone you're watching Dark Journalist, and we have Walter Bosley, author Walter Bosley, here with us. We're talking the Secret Space Program, and it is fascinating. What a big night with, we've been running since last week, the No SSPTM campaign. It was launched right here on Friday night, and everyone picked up on it. Incredible people. Cliff High stood tall, getting that out there. Walter Bosley, you were on there in the boards, in the trench warfare, talking to people and being like, hey, let's get real, and it's just a phenomenal. Catherine Austin Fitts, Joseph Farrell coming out and really talking about it.
Joe from the Carolinas, CW champion.
Yes, Joe.
Well, I have a roll call of people that I'm going to get to on that, but I really want to say that everybody coming out and doing this incredible work was valuable. And it's an interesting thing that happens when you stand up. A lot of that disinformation and those types of things kind of clears away, and you're like, whoa, what's going on here? And I think that's very helpful, and it's something that, you were talking about how we could not set this precedent, and I was saying, well, it can't stand, and I think that this really makes the big difference.
I would like to add that, I think, it took 7 days for them to get the point, and that's pretty quick.
It is.
What I meant by that is only took 7 days. I think, though, with in the particular case of the individuals we're talking about, is that, and I don't want to go off on a tangent on this or a rant, but people say, why do you have, such a thing about this? I'll tell you why. I was one of the speakers at that 2015 Secret Space Program Conference, okay? Which was harassed online by the Corey Goode shills, demanding every day, how can you have a Secret Space Program conference and Corey Goode's not invited to speak? Joseph Farrell, earlier today or a couple days ago with Joe from the Carolinas, explained very well. I've explained it. Others have explained it. That conference and that kind of research, Corey Goode has no place in, because he's a storyteller. Take my word for it. Feel the vibe. It's all from the spirits. It's a bunch of revelatory BS, in my opinion, until he proves otherwise. And our thing was researchers, but there he was. His shills were doing that, and then he sent his shills to, it was, you guys have heard me say it. It was an imposition on the scholarly, serious secret space program research community, an imposition. And he started it in 2014. He sent, you can see it, Project Avalon, I think is where it is, but or something you sent around, where he admits to sending his one of his people, I think the guy's name was Paul or something, to the 2014 conference in San Mateo to scope it out. Yeah. And so, he was targeting this community and data mining it, at least as early as 2014. And I'll be honest with you, I just learned that Randy Moggins over at Off Planet Radio and Bill Ryan had been dealing with this bozo, this individual. I'm sorry. Since 2000,
Walter, can you say that again?
Since 2011, and so it's, if you look close enough, you'll find it. But this is the answer to the question. Gosh, Walter, why does this bother you so much? Because at least since 2015, I've watched for 3 years the serious secret space program research community. Wow, say that 3 times fast. Has been, diverted off track for 3 years because, they wanted to give so much spotlight. When MUFON, what was it, last year?
Unbelievable.
Gave these guys a conference essentially. This was, wow, that was just the nadir of the ufology communities, handing a spotlight over to these guys. And I just loved Richard Dolan's remarks on the panel with those guys sitting right next to him. That was great. But,
there's a Twilight Zone feeling to that whole event.
And this is why it bothers me, because it is unsubstantiated storytelling nonsense that really imposed itself and derailed and attempted to usurp an entire field of study.
There's no question about it. And, this year, MUFON, their big speaker was Elizondo. So it's like, you're a 2-time loser, because what do you have going on here that you are grabbing literally, the odd end, the CIA end, the junk conspiracy end, it's very disturbing the way that those groups operate. And I think that they've lost, maybe their numbers have gone up, but they've actually lost a lot of clout with anyone who thought they were serious.
You just brought up an excellent point.
Yes.
What you just said, MUFON's doing it to sell tickets to events, because, and people say, well, Bosley, you sell books and things related to books. I go, let me tell you the difference between me selling books and what MUFON is doing, okay? I don't think anybody would tell you that, right now, Elizondo gets a lot of attention, so let's have Elizondo at our thing.
Yeah.
Oh, Corey Good and these guys, they get a lot of attention, so let's have them at our thing, okay? Nobody is saying, write a book about Juan Cabrillo maybe being a Templar Knight. You'll make a killing, Walter, but that's what I write. Nobody's saying, do a book about the missing 6 months of, Richard Burton, who most people think is the actor from the 20th century. You'll make a killing, but I spend 5 months researching it and another 6 weeks writing that, and on and on. A book about Ambrose Bierce. And I mean, when you look at the stuff I do, the only one that you could say that you could maybe start to accuse me of pandering is Shimmering Light, because it involves Roswell. But then when you read the book, you see that I'm not really pandering to, the Roswell crowd. So there's the difference. What we're talking about when we say, like in the case of MUFON, and, it's fair to talk about them. They did it. Okay. It's a fact. That's what they're serving. I think in all fairness to them, we would have to survey their audience, their members. And if the majority of them said, yeah, we love this stuff, we believe Elizondo, then fine, that's what they want to do, if that's what their members and stuff want. But I recall last year at the big whistleblower fest that they had, that was a big scandal. There was a lot of members that wanted to quit, and some who did quit over that. So I don't know, maybe they find Elizondo a little bit more practical or tasteful or something. I don't know. Has there been any word on that about about MUFON membership's reaction to this?
I remember from very prominent researchers who were there that the nobody clapped when he was done. I found that interesting. It was like real flat reaction. They did not feel like they were getting the real deal. I will say this though. By the way, your marketing self-sabotage is a thing to behold, and I praise you. High praise for you on it. The TTSA and the threat program. Everything's threat, right? When they come out with the program, they go threat, 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 threat.
Yeah, particularly if it's DoD related, that's what they're looking for. Threats, that's their charter.
Right, exactly. But when you bring this idea of threat into the UFO aspect, are you looking then to create a corridor of funding to fight that threat? And is that what is really behind this? That they don't want to sell T-shirts for Tom DeLonge and make $1 million? What did they get? $2 million they raised through this stock offering, right? Yeah.
Look, if there's an intel op in there, which I have hypothesized my suspicions that there is. Any money that TTSA as such makes on TTSA product, that's not what the intel agency doesn't care. That's going to be for TTSA and Tom. Okay, here you go. Here's your pay. Okay, when you're running an op, I'll give you an example. In counter espionage ops. Now, I as a military agent cannot pay an asset money, okay, for doing this, but the FBI can. And
interesting.
And the way it's done, I will not go into. So the way I see it is, that's just to explain my point about TTSA and the money. Any money they make on T-shirts, movies, books, or whatever, that will go in the TTSA coffers. And for Tom DeLonge, who rightfully, folks, let's establish right now, there's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with making as much money as you can possibly make. I am not a Marxist. Right. I spent years of my life fighting Marxists. Okay, that's my position on all that. Everything should be free, man. That's not practical. It's childish. So the nothing wrong with Tom making money off TTSA. It's a business. Nothing wrong with it. And as businesses go, it's kind of cool that he wants to put out movies and books and stuff like that. But yeah, the intel agency side of that I suspect, the op, no, they're not in it to make money. They're in it, I think, for perception management. And there could be a variety of taskings under that. It could be to control the narrative on UFOs and eventually ETs. It could be to build public desire for just what you said, for more tax dollars to be channeled into Department of Defense space operations. And again, I'd like to remind the audience of something else. It could be legitimate. Okay, if you go back to other interviews and in books, it is possible, folks, that there is a threat out there.
Okay.
We have to accept that possibility. There could be a threat, and that's aside from what Werner von Braun told Carol Rosen. You know, they could still fake a big threat, blah blah blah, and there still actually be a real threat out there. Okay, so
I think the problem is they've lost.
It gets murky.
They've lost a lot of credibility on that. You know, WMDs in Iraq, for example. You know, that's a slam dunk, right? You know, they've lost a lot of credibility, and I think particularly in intelligence circles that their agenda has been too tied in with the deep state style aspects, like the Wall Street end of it. They're not answering to the actual public government. They're working out of this covert government, and at a certain point, that covert and overt thing goes on, and they kind of run away, and we have to take them back in and say, look, you know, you're still accountable to the actual government. This is the problem that we see with them.
And let's remember too that the guys who tried to pull that on us, the WMD thing, that they're part of their little, I don't know what's the word for it. They're the little globalist mafia kind of thing. They're neocon.
Yes.
World. And what you just said about how they kind of ruined that tactic, it makes you wonder if the guys who are trying to pull off the faked alien threat are like, you know, doing the Three Stooges nuggy on the head at those guys, at the neocons, for ruining the effectiveness. You idiots in the WMDs, we were going to use this for something bigger, and now you got people not believing. But here's the thing: I think that von Braun's claim,
yes,
and that potential threat, so to speak, that fake threat, I think they have always intended a major demonstration to pull that off.
Wow.
You know, Joseph Farrell has talked about this, that, you know, develop the technology to mimic and copy what the others can do, so that you can put on a demonstration and say, oh, see, look, here's the enemy flying saucer, here it comes. And it's actually our drone operated replica of the enemy flying saucer. But that's not to say that these things aren't really out there, and there could be a real threat. So I'm just saying, keep that filed in the back of your mind. Elizondo might not be the bad villain that this conversation tends to paint these guys.
yeah. Well, Elizondo being in counterintelligence, you know, and being the front man for the Tom DeLonge GTSA operation, that's uncomfortable, number one. Two, the incredible presence of the CIA in that operation. Suddenly, it wasn't there 2 years ago. Really, by the second year, boom, it's just Elizondo, and that whole thing that came out with the New York Times rolling him out. You know, he was in there, he had his coffee, he had that look on his face like, I'm a disgruntled employee of the government, and I'm coming out to tell my story.
Right.
And Alexander Bruce does a wonderful thing whenever, I wish I had that picture handy, but she always says that picture is staged. Like, they took it, so many different angles just to get that right feeling going. You know, this guy with his coffee in a cafe window, reflective, and all the BS stories that came out. And I was amazed to see people like Leslie Kean and George Knapp go along with it, because it was like, you know, and then what happened? You know, Lewis is like, oh, I can't talk about that, but, you know, it was some big stuff, let me tell you. And now I'm going to have my own TV show about it. You know, it's like, what the hell is going on here? But that op, I think, is particularly interesting, and I think we see where they're going, which is they're trying to mix the marketing aspect in with people's interests to kind of spin the way people think about these things. And so it's not just the like government shutdown, like don't think about this. It's now think about it this way.
Yeah.
Which is a totally different mindset. And that happens.
That's what we call perception management.
There we go.
You know, think about it the way we want you to think about it. But you bring up a good thing. How many of those CIA guys at TTSA were in the psychiatry,
Yes.
department of the CIA, right?
Yeah.
And okay, folks, pop quiz time. What famous product did the CIA psychiatry division come up with?
Let's see here. MK.
Yeah,
That is one of those. I mean, it's
exactly.
unbelievable. Yes, these are the guys who would be developing that. They'd be like the inheritors of that whole program.
And when you see the Pavlovian response of the TTSA fanboys that
Yeah.
were just out there, boom, talking smack from the beginning, and anytime you'd say something, you'd get the mantra, the paradigm's changing. You're not part of it. You're just an old hater. The paradigm's changing. You're gonna be left behind. And they would blanket you with this. There's one guy in particular who goes out there and gathers all his little buddies, and says, "Oh, they're being mean to me, guys, help me!" And then suddenly, an hour later, all his pals are, trying to gang tackle you with their mantra about TTSA. And I'm thinking, if we really looked at it, if we really look closely, would we find evidence of MK Ultra type methods and tactics and technology in TTSA and how they announce things and how they present and what they present? This another individual, likes to say he was selected, specially selected. And then when you get into the details, he kind of wasn't really specially selected, but they're welcome to let him. I mean, he's welcome to believe that. They're ready to let people believe that. And let me tell you, that's what you do a lot of times when I've vetted and recruited assets. Okay. I know how to butter up a human being. I know how to make a person feel like they're one in a million. When I was in training for the world,
I feel better already, actually.
Yeah. When I was in training for the world I worked in, we used to make a joke about all of us, oh, we're 1 in a million. Oh, we're 1 in 14 billion. And ha, 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 because we knew it was a tactic.
Right.
We knew that they were, we passed the physical. Yeah, there's something in the numerous psych batteries you take to work in that world I work in. There's something in there they see that they can depend on and that they like. Yeah. Like, for instance, for 6 years, I was out of the country 7 or 8 months of the year, different country each time. I was able to, I didn't lose any sleep, or I didn't have an emotional problem at all with, this is going to sound terrible, but, I was able to talk to my son like maybe 10 minutes a week,
Wow.
And I was fine, he was fine. We have this great relationship now. He's fine. We're fine. We both knew that I was out there doing something important. Now, if I were just selling shoes, that would make me kind of a very weak ass father. Okay. Right. But I wasn't just selling shoes. There was a reason, I can only talk to my kid 10 minutes a week. And they look for that kind of thing when they do, so yeah, you're special in that regard. But going back to, these kinds of guys and how special they are, when they want to kind of use somebody to put waves out in the pond of society or a particular community, they'll tell them any old thing they want to believe. And again, sorry, I've gone off on a diversion.
No, I think it's important to understand the environment. That whole group, like Pandolfi being such a big name in the CIA, Elizondo coming out of the CIA, that association with Brennan, these are major CIA figures coming into the UFO field out of nowhere. Brennan himself came forward in a press conference and said, I think we should look into that UFO thing. And I thought that was a little head fake to his old friend Elizondo. The green light. You've got the green light to create this threat program. Now, I want to remind everyone that you're watching Dark Journalists. We're here with Walter Bosley, a fantastic author. I always recommend the Empire of the Wheels series, but he has lots of other books too. I just think that series really captures a lot of the work that he does. The new book that you have is Shimmering Light, but you have a new one coming up.
Yeah, and I'm hoping to get it out by early December. It was I had thought I was going to, months ago, I thought it was going to be this month, around this time this month. And
yeah, right.
That didn't work. And so
well, we all just lost a week there, so
Yeah, we did, didn't we? But it was a good week.
Fantastic.
But in order for me to do it right, it's going to be December, but I'm determined to get it out before the end of the year. So it'll be the Christmas present. But yes, my most recent release was it was Shimmering Light. Bierce was before that. So.
And Empire of the Wheel is 3 books.
3 books. It is a trilogy. Now, I do go into some Empire of the Wheel material in other books. In Secret Missions 3, the Destination Carcosa, the one about Ambrose Bierce, I go into some of the Empire of the Wheel people and issues there. Secret Missions 1 has some thematic and geographical association to the Empire of the Wheel stuff. Origin was based on my 2015 or my 2015 presentation at the Secret Space Program Conference in Texas was based on my Origin research. And that was where I think I first, after the Empire of the Wheel 2 book, I really got into presenting who I think the mysterious Cora Stanton was and how that tied into breakaway civilization stuff. So
Yes.
you find Empire of the Wheel in some of my other...
There's very early Secret Space Program material in your work. Goes all the way back to the 19th century. That's
particularly Destination Carcosa, where I talk about what I think was the first black U.S. black program, deep classified black program, as they're called.
Fascinating. And Miss Olivia, we're gonna take your questions. Now, are you there, Olivia?
I am right here. Actually, I had a question around that. So
Yeah.
Sunrabbit was asking, how far back does the black budget go, since the SSP goes back to the 1800s airship phenomenon?
That is a great question,
Mhm.
actually. My impression on that is really, I track it all the way back to Atlantis, really, because if you go into that material, then you're looking at incredible descriptions of flying craft. And those are advanced civilizations that had the technology back there. So it depends. Do you want to talk in a modern sense? How long have we had those? Then, I think you do look at the 19th century. But if you want to talk in the real kind of global humanity version, I think you're looking at something like an advanced culture back there. But we're going to take a lot of questions on this. I do want to point out to everyone that the big news of the night is I've worked closely with Walter and others on the No SSP TM, which is about the Secret Space Program trademark that came up, and the Sphere Being Alliance, the leader of the Sphere Being Alliance, Corey Goode, came out with a statement saying that he was abandoning the trademarking of the Secret Space Program. Everyone welcomed that. It's a reckless idea, and it was an incredible moment of people standing up and doing this. What's interesting is the alternative research does not trend very much on Twitter. I can tell you that. We trended on Twitter with No SSPTM, and there was a point at which it was getting over 1,000 retweets an hour, which is incredible and shows you the power of people catching on and really getting a handle on this. So congratulations to everyone. I want to point out, I've been spotlighting women who are standing up in the alternative research world also, and some of the great people on the No SSPTM campaign were, we had phenomenal people come forward. Gigi Young, as I pointed out, stood up with a statement and has done that. Is very, has a great feel and a sense for when a line has been crossed, and she was a great voice out there doing that. Groovy Bean came forward, and she had been really, basically came out of retirement to do this, and everyone had been looking for her and seeing what she was up to. She came out and told us a great deal of material. Earlier I said this, and I want to reiterate that Tracy Narrows did an incredibly brave thing today in working on this, and I have great respect for Teresa and the work that she does as a journalist. But she came out and tweeted the No SSPTM very independently. Having worked with, and she doesn't work as closely as people think, maybe with that group, but she has worked with them and done interviews with Corey Goode and things like that. For her to come out and do that, I think was quite valuable, and I really, thank you very much, Teresa. I think you showed that there's a lot of there's a lot of intelligence and that's there in these groups and different people. And, when we get around these different groups, we have to understand that it's not a monolith, that when we don't agree with certain people around certain things, there can always be good people around them. And Teresa definitely proved that today. And, that's a very brave thing to do if you're in a group or you're associated with them in the past, even if you don't work that closely with them. To come out and say, I'm more standing in a sovereign way against the trademark infringement than I am just hunkering down and being loyal. So, I think she's really demonstrated something amazing there. But we have so many great people to thank on that. But I want to really shout out to this too, which is, unfortunately, I have some sad news, which was the passing of Brooke Shiner today, who was an incredible Project Avalon researcher. And,
Wow.
Yeah, she did some incredible, she's done incredible things for me, especially last year when I was looking into this. And she knew so much and so many different things about cults and all the rest of it. It was quite helpful. And she had cancer for a while there, and she was a strong fighter till the end. And all of our blessings are there with you, Brooke, and all the Project Avalon people. Thank you so much for the things that you've done. And with that, Miss Olivia.
Okay, I'm going to start with Cliff High.
Congratulations, Cliff. I mean,
Yes.
you did some incredible work, and you're still, I think, educating people about what is at stake with these terms and trademarks.
Yes, Cliff has a new project on Twitter, which is called
What is it called?
Educating Jordan. Which is very entertaining. So Cliff High is asking, so do we start over and from where?
With secret space program?
Yeah, and I think
research?
Yeah.
Well, what we do is there's some of us who continued pulling our threads and since 2015. But as far as, and I will tell you, I'm not going to go into details, but Daniel will tell you that's already being discussed. We're just going to pick up where we were brushed aside. Where we left off. And it's, we're not going to tell people, like we've never told people, I can't even begin. See, I lose my words. We're not going to tell people that what we present is from some revelation from an orbital station. No, gosh, we do old-fashioned research and we cite references. And you know what? Catherine Austin Fitts might bore some people when she talks about numbers. Some people, not all of us, because we get it. But pay attention to what she says when she talks about that. Because as I said, I think the last time I was on with you, last Friday, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I said that I think when she, I think it was 2014, when she pointed out those trillions of dollars is when the serious secret space program research field and community first got targeted for this diversion.
Became saturated.
Yeah, she was the point of the spear, like I said last week. And they realized, whoa, wait a minute. These people at this Connect the Dots conference thing, they're getting a little too close. So we need to. There's
no question. That's how the deep state black budget operators roll. When something gets close to their territory, they send out ops that are distraction ops. Let's face it.
And this was a 1-2 punch. Blue Sphere Alliance, Corey Good, and then TTSA.
Yeah, there you
go. They applied it as a 1-2 punch. They might have been in works. But when they applied it as the 1-2 punch.
No question, and I totally agree with you. What I would say to the answer to that question is the best is yet to come. I think that's kind of the best answer. Okay, Miss Olivia.
Okay, Egyptian princess. Do you think POTUS can time travel Tesla technology?
Well, I'll tell you, I put together an episode called Tesla, Trump, and the Time Capsule. It has 190,000 views now, which is a phenomenal response to that episode. I put a great deal of my own research into John Trump, who is Trump's uncle, who was an MIT professor who worked deep in the UFO file because his mentor was Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush ran the Rad Lab, which is an incredible endeavor, which required ultimate secrecy. And then he chose his best people to work on the Majestic programs around the UFO file. So Trump is definitely clued into that. Trump takes every opportunity to mention his uncle. Mentioned him recently in the UK about how he shared so many brilliant secrets with him, and so on. Well, if he shared the UFO file aspect with him, then it's quite remarkable. That's probably more remarkable than the time travel aspect rumors around Trump. But certainly, yeah, he's got some deep knowledge.
I just want to add that, anybody who's heard me for a while, I'm not going to pretend that in the past I haven't talked about this time phenomena stuff, because it deeply intrigues me and interests me. But, I've said, if you go back and find some of my old interviews, I've said that, I was told things by my mentor and when I was on active duty and when I was in that career, that we had been messing around with time phenomena related technology for 100 years. And I was told this in the 90s. Details? No. Was I shown a jump room? No. Is there anything I can give you that's material to substantiate this? No. All I can give you is anecdotal stuff, which, guess what? I'm not going to do that because I can't prove any of it. And that's not how I operate. Okay.
Well, isn't it remarkable though? Just the idea, we know that they're working, that they're looking at the time.
Yeah.
That's great, I would say.
Oh, imagine how my jaw dropped. There I am, this was around the time I think I had just gotten into the Air Force or whatever, and I ask my mentor some things and I get that answer. I'm like, wow. And then of course I would ask the next question and I was told, you're not ready for that. That conversation will come down the line. And that's unfortunately where that ended. But there's some things that I could get a bunch of attention for a couple of years, by talking about a bunch of stuff I don't talk about. And then in the end, well, can you prove it, Walter? No, I can't. And then guess what I'd be? I'd be no better than another ridiculous storyteller. And there's alternative possibilities for what I've been told. And I discussed that in the book Shimmering Light, when, despite how exciting and enticing my dad's story on the face of it was, it's very possible that it was all a false narrative laid down in his psyche with MK Ultra tactics, because this was in the late 50s before MK Ultra was outed. Even some of this stuff, I've even said that some of this stuff with the time technology, some of this, the Antarctica thing, I've said I was told about that 20 years ago on the QT, and my impression was to not say anything about it. And I've discussed how that could be, we talked about it last week, how that all this Antarctica stuff could have been an inking of the waters. They tell people the same wild story and see who keeps it quiet like they were told to, or see who runs their mouths and goes and tells it to George Noory or whatever. That tells them who they can trust and who they can't.
Well, listen, this is interesting, actually, because just in a kind of capsule form, we'll get back to questions real quick, but whistleblowers, you have a great way of sizing up how to kind of take a whistleblower and get some idea of who they are immediately. So just give us that small, quick formula.
Well, it's really a lot of practical things. Number one, they say that they worked with an ultra deep classified program that they're not supposed to talk about. And here they are going out, on these big radio shows or at conferences talking about it. Okay. First, they claim they were.
So it's contradictory.
Yeah. They the very fact that they're talking about it's like when Corey Good says, they take me up in the middle of the night and you guys don't know this is going on, but it's going on. Well, if the implication there is that they don't want humanity to know yet that about this disclosure thing, but here they're letting him talk about it to every media person that will broadcast it. It doesn't make sense. But going back to these whistleblowers, they claim they were military program. Well, the first thing to do is ask for that. I'm going to sound like a parrot. Ask for that DD-214. Okay. Some of these guys, you ask for it and you get a tap dance.
What is the
so they don't have the documentation to back up what they're saying.
Tell everyone what a DD-214 is.
DD-214 is the Defense Department document that every U.S. military service member receives upon a departure from active duty. Okay, It identifies when you went in. It identifies when you got out, what rank you entered, what rank you got out, your pay grade. It's the bases, your basic assignment, your decorations, and it's a very important document because it verifies to future employers that you indeed aren't lying. You were in the military. It also tells you the all-important what your discharge status is, honorable or dishonorable, or
Okay, that's crucial. That's crucial.
yeah, that's very crucial. It's important for a veteran because that's how you get your benefits. When you go to the VA hospital, you turn in your DD-214. They can look it up, verify it. It is a serious document. And I think one of the reasons why these fake whistleblowers will not produce it is because I think they're smart enough to know that if they go faking a DD-214, that's a federal offense. Okay. And they're going to be in big trouble.
That's the end of the line there with the hoax. But the claim du jour seems to be, I was in a secret space program. Oh my God, they took me off planet and I fought aliens and everything else.
For 20 years and back.
Oh yeah. But here's the interesting thing. From a practical standpoint, I mean, you've probably done interrogations and things like that in your line of work. How do you kind of collapse that narrative quickly?
Or
how would you get around, get through to them and figure it out? What would be the line of questioning?
You would want to question the specifics of if they claim to be a veteran. You want to start questioning the specifics of their duty. Okay, what branch they were in, what programs they said they were in. There's ways to question them to where you can trip up a liar, okay? Because there's lingo, there's nomenclature. And if they get that wrong, it's like, okay, we got something fishy going on here. You can also look at you go through that DD-214. You go through there, you can base a lot of your interview, your interrogation on that. And now, when you get into the fantastical claims, it doesn't take a knowledge of the military to be able to break that down because, basically, that's a difficult question because doing those kinds of interviews and interrogations are a case-by-case thing.
Okay,
and, you'd have to say, okay, I want you to do this kind of probative subject interview of Corey Good or Jason Rice. And when I get them in the room, I'm going to be able to do a Rust Cole on them. That's the reference to True Detective, the first season.
Yes.
I loved those scenes where he's interviewing people because that's what they taught us to do was run that theme and I don't know, it's kind of like I don't know how to answer that. I'm sorry. They hit. Some people are going to say, oh, he's not the real deal, he can't give us the methodology. Well, I'm not going to go through No. I think you gave us the point. But of course, one of those whistleblowers gets into a room with Walter Bosley. He's out of luck. That's basically what we get the notion. I'm going to do my best to. But here's the other thing. You're not going to. I think I was struggling with that because that's only part of how you would do it. You're only going to get part of the story, and if they stonewall you, and this is something some hotshot interrogators won't admit. I've been up against a guy who just stonewalled me. I didn't get anything out of him, nothing, and I tried everything. And so, if they stonewall you and stick to their story, then all you do is you pick apart indirectly. You just start digging in. Like I think some people did that with some of these people where they claimed this, but yet I think with Corey Good even, he claimed he was this, but then they could point to where he was that, somewhere else. But the biggest thing, honestly, to break them down, and again, I'm sorry I'm taking so long. The biggest thing to break them down is basically, say, hey, your testimony's not enough. You need to provide more. And this is why I tell these guys flat out, publicly, I say, you're making it up. Because here's the thing. If they're not making it up, if they're telling the truth, they can prove they're telling the truth.
Right.
But here's the weird thing. If they were really in a program and they're telling the truth, then they're going to seriously be violating their security agreement, which they wouldn't do in the first place,
Right.
trying to convince us.
Right.
So that's how you know these guys are making this up and lying, is they're not being arrested after that first interview. And they're not disappearing after that first interview. That's how, another way I know, like Andrew Basiago, I know he's full of baloney because the man's a lawyer, right? He knows how to sue people. He knows how to go after people legally. And when you tell him, sorry, I don't believe your story, I don't think it's true, I think you're making it up, you know, and you're not getting sued, he's not coming at you because he knows he can't prove a word he's saying. And when you put yourself out there publicly, make yourself a public figure, sorry, you're open to the criticism, and people can legally and safely say, you're lying. Yeah, you're a liar. How do you know? Because you can't prove what you're saying?
Just wait till he runs for president. Then you're really going to be up. Miss Olivia.
Okay, so David Tormina. Walter, do you suspect it's even possible for there to be an actual SSP operator to come forward? You're addressing that right now.
Good. This is good, actually. I wanted to ask this question. Let's
go ahead.
Let's suppose an actual person who had been in a covert space program contacted you. Do you think it's possible that somebody in that program would come out and be a genuine whistleblower? Could it happen?
Of course it could happen. I think the circumstances under which it would happen would be if that person witnessed some serious criminal, egregious act that went on as a, that was committed by the secret space program institutionally or individuals involved with it. And if they came forward as a true whistleblower. Now, I think I said this last week, or I said it online this week. I said it last week. In the case of Chelsea Manning, that person could go to the IG and they would be protected, and they would, it's the legal means they have to come forward and say the general or the colonel is breaking the law seriously, and this heinous thing is going on. So, but
yeah,
it is possible. But and the reason I say this is because I don't see a secret space program as an evil thing. Personally, I think it's kind of cool. I think we've had one since the late 50s, and most people that are in it, I applaud them because they're the coolest guys and gals in town. They're in the secret space program, people. Come on. Who's gonna
check this out? Walter, you if you had somebody in the secret space program who was actually in it, in your opinion, based on your own military background, who would they answer to? The Air Force?
Well, yeah, whatever branch they're okay. Yes. Here's how the secret space program would work, in my opinion. It would be like a joint task force, okay? In a JTF, the Navy people answer to their naval line of command, the Air Force, and so on. Now, when you have the mix of branch personnel, you have Air Force or Navy and Army people all working together, what they do is they have a rotating command. For this deployment, or 6 months or year, it's going to be Air Force Colonel, Air Force General, so-and-so. And then when they switch it out, it becomes, Navy Admiral, so-and-so. And so whoever is determined as the operational commander of the mission or the unit is who they answer to chain of command. And ultimately, just like the military, that's ultimately the president of the United States is the commander-in-chief who gets briefed in on, the operations of this thing.
Miss Olivia.
Twilight wants to know about super soldiers.
Wait. Okay, do you mean super soldiers like the Space Commando jump room guys we're talking about, or are you talking about the technology they're doing to enhance bioweaponry kind of stuff?
Why don't you field?
Well, let's put it this way. Basically, there's a program somewhere to create super soldiers, and then there's a bunch of people who kind of see themselves as super soldiers. There's probably two very different things. But let's just say this. Do you think the super soldier program exists, period?
To some degree, somebody is messing around with, I'm not going to say messing around. To some degree, they're probably developing that, sure. I'm just not personally, I don't study that particular thing. I just heard about it on the periphery, and some of the stuff I've heard makes sense to me.
I think that Boston Dynamics and their Terminator robots, going into this thing and this kind of grotesque thing, that's probably where they're going with super soldiers, which is robots. That's my guess on that.
At least that would be the first stage, I would agree.
Okay, fascinating. Miss Olivia.
Okay, Ghost Recon wants to know, was there any answer to DJ's debate challenge?
Well, no, it's a non-issue now, because the only reason there was a debate challenge was because they were trademarking the secret space program, and they've given up on doing that. So I don't have any interest in debating them on any issue anymore. I literally put that out there because I felt like this was a way to suss out the whole trademark issue. But actually, Walter, I wanted to get your impressions quickly about the trademark issue, how it came up, and the way the week played out. Obviously, the community responded in an incredible fashion and really changed things. And whatever group was trying to do something like this would think twice about it now that this has happened. What were your own impressions from the week and seeing this happen?
Well, from early on, it was a clear misstep to send that letter to Jason Rice, and the way it was worded, it certainly looked like what Corey said he was not doing, and was telling somebody not to use the terms secret space program and SSP. I think it was a misstep to even file for the acronym SSP. Now, the other stuff, Blue Sphere Alliance and the terms that are unique to his thing, he has every right, and that is normal. He's right about that. And remember too, if he had come up with if an artist created his own logo that used the letters SSP and stood for Secret Space Program, but it was a specific, unique, stylized logo, he would have every right to trademark that, right? Because that's his unique logo. But I think what it was just an act of hubris. I'm just going to do this. And like I said before, I think what alarmed everybody, what alarmed me, was the history of the whole Corey Good Blue Sphere thing. It was how they came onto the scene, into the community, imposing themselves, and what it was the culmination of a lot of other things that it had just been kind of pissing people off, righteously so.
That's a good way to put it. I'll tell you something that's interesting, which is you and I are pro trademark and anti IP theft. I think that's a really kind of easy way to sum that up.
Right.
Okay, Miss Olivia.
Okay, Koldasi wants to know, is it true that the U.S. Space Force is going to be working with their Russian counterparts?
Well, they're having a lot of problems because of, they have this guy now who's the Secretary of he was working with the Secretary of State, and now he has Trump's ear as security advisor. His name is John Bolton. He's spoiling everything in relation to Trump's openings with the Russians. So Putin recently, when he was meeting this guy across the table, said, look, it seems to me that, you're not here bringing anything but thorns. You're all out of the flowers, and it's all thorns. And this is how the Russians regard it. So I think all of our programs with Russia in relation to space are in jeopardy because John Bolton, who's a neocon from the Bush administration, who has Trump's ear right now, unfortunately, is giving him all this malarkey that he can, by pulling out of the nuclear reduction treaties, which have been in place since Reagan signed them with Gorbachev in 1987, that he can kind of get a better deal, appealing to Trump's better deal thing. And it's a horrible idea to escalate on the nuclear weapons front, especially since they have weapons now that supersede nuclear weapons, in my opinion. And the X technology is all wrapped up in that. So, incredible questions. Great questions. Let's keep rolling.
Okay, so Phase Templar wants to know, the Space Force could be about bringing the SSP into the light. And Tricky Vicky says, does DJ think maybe Trump will attempt to absorb the SSP with the new one and avoid ever disclosing there was an SSP?
Well, this is interesting because Catherine Fitz made a great observation about Iran-Contra and 9/11, which is that they were attempts to take the black budget and put it on regular budget. So, like, for example, in 9/11, it just became too much to, keep all these programs hidden. So if you create this event, or if you know this event is going to happen and you take advantage of it, then you create the Homeland Security Force. And Homeland Security is something that we did not have. First of all, Homeland it was a term that they started to refer to the United States as. And this is a very tricky thing because the United States has a constitution. And as a constitution, under that constitution, it's the United States that is under that constitution. The United States is not under, but Homeland Security is not under the same protocol because the United States is what we call it. So if you start calling the United States the Homeland, you can suddenly apply anything you want to it. It doesn't have that constitutional meaning anymore. So it's very, very tricky. It sounds like Teak going off on you.
Sorry, I'm covering up the mic. I'm right near the door, and I had to let them out.
No, you're good. You're good. We're gonna take questions for about another 10 minutes and wrap up tonight. I also have a roll call of people I want to shout out to who are involved in the No SSPTM program. You're watching the Dark Journalist show. Kontiki is going wild in the back. And Walter Bosley is here with us, spelling it out between real whistleblowers and how to suss them out, which is so crucial now that we're taking a whole new look at the secret space program, propaganda, reality versus the real thing versus this kind of fake, trumped up junk conspiracy version. It's going to come more and more into focus because with the development of the Space Force, we're in a whole different paradigm. And we have to keep that in mind. This is real. It's on the ground. The space economy is real. Read the recent Solari report that Catherine Austin Fitz put out. I have a 3-issue episode. We went into it and we did 3 different episodes on this. It's all available on this channel and at darkjournalist.com. By the way, when you go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for the newsletter because that's the way that you and I stay in touch. It's a very important aspect for us to keep in mind. Now, rolling along, back to the questions.
Okay, Kontiki Man is so hot to know the answer to that. Walter, do you have any thoughts on why Eisenhower canceled the first known SSP, the MISS program of the United States Air Force in the 50s, the Man in Space MISS program?
I think it's my opinion that was around the time that what I think the real classified manned space program, the real secret space program, I think that's when it stood up and became classified. Because remember, by a lot of people don't know this. I talk about this in depth in Shimmering Light. A lot of people don't know this, but the Mercury manned space program that is featured in the film The Right Stuff. Okay. That was a U.S. Air Force manned space program. The U.S. Air Force created that and was developing that and was going. That's how my dad was involved in Mercury. My dad didn't work for NASA. My dad was U.S. Air Force, and his unit, his physiological training unit at George Air Force Base out here in Hesperia, California, did the ground testing of those silver pressure suits you see the astronauts wear in the Mercury program. Okay, that's how my dad ended up getting that clearance involved with the space program, because it wasn't until late 1958, I think October, that NASA was stood up and Mercury was handed over. I qualify that the public Mercury was handed over to NASA. I argue that the identical Mercury technology continued to be developed and deployed by the U.S. Air Force / U.S. military after that as our secret space program. And I think the reason Eisenhower canceled things was because it was decided that that's what they were going to do instead, was do this NASA thing for the, publicly, and then go classified with the military parallel program. And I say it in Shimmering Light. My hypothesis is that it was parallel technology until we started getting to Apollo, and then it started, the military being the under one here, started pulling a little bit ahead of NASA, and by the time we got to the 80s and 90s,
yeah,
the military one started to pull way ahead of NASA. Not so far. Look, folks, You're not going to convince me we have Starfleet out there. Please stop it. I'm not going to believe that nonsense that we have the Starship Enterprise, this 5,000 people, on, and it's the sliding glass doors. Come on.
Well, it's an interesting thing. It made me think of this, but the X-37B that is in orbit for 400 days has a classified payload. What is it?
Yeah.
In your
what is the classified?
What's the payload? Yeah.
It's either a camera, a spy camera that looks down or looks up. It could be anything, to be honest. Now, I have said that people say, well, how could they put people in space and us not know about it? Well, and classically somebody says, well, my uncle was he was at Vandenberg and he was there when there was launches. Well, what was your uncle? Well, he was Private Snuffy or Airman Snuffy or Tech Sergeant so-and-so, and he was in security forces. Okay, I'm sorry, but Tech Sergeant Snuffy, as we like to say, ain't necessarily going to be briefed in on what's in that self-contained classified module that's going into the payload bay of that rocket.
The less people that know, the better. Yeah.
It could be a life support, module that then is taken up into space, and then from there they do their thing and maybe go into a station or a craft we don't know about. I'm not saying there aren't these cool, amazing things. I'm just saying it's not as way far ahead as people think. And I'm saying they've been putting people up in space, in my opinion, right under our noses, all along.
Absolutely. Well, Walter, you and I came to the same conclusion about that, which I find very interesting, which my guess is that the payload is about surveillance. So it seems like so is yours.
But here's the interesting thing. Surveillance of us or surveillance of them out there. Joseph Farrell has an interesting thing he brings up, that those cousins are out there and they may indeed be on their way back. And the Werner von Braun thing may be that the globalist neocon, collectivist international wants to, what's the word? They want... They want to use the knowledge that there is someone coming here on their way. They want to use it to their benefit, right? To get control of us and do their nefarious political things they like to do, so that by the time these cousins arrive, it backs up their BS story they use to corral us. Or as Hoagland and Barra, I know a lot of people say, "Oh, Richard Hoagland," but in their book,
Dark Mission.
Dark Mission, they do bring up the issue. Have these guys reached out to the cousins, as Farrell calls them? Have they reached out to the cousins? And they're going to be kind of like the butt kissers that you see in Red Dawn, who buddied up to the Russians, or in V, right? The humans that or Vichy France or whatever, with the Nazis. That's how I see the neocons and the globalists and the world banker types. I see them, bending knee and everything and bowing to whoever it is that's coming, because they're going to see themselves, as the favored ones when the overlords come.
Now, this is so interesting to me, because we can see the value of true research, valuable research, that we need that kind of insight if these types of things are going on. And I think the Space Force is a great kind of confirmation that we're deep into it now. Miss Olivia. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Space Force isn't just to have the high ground for here, folks. If they're going to admit to a secret space program and they're just going to have an open Space Force, I'm telling you, there's something out there that's worrying them.
Absolutely. Miss Olivia.
Okay.
Take the last two best questions you got.
Okay. So, I'm going to bunch them together. Okay. So, Andrew J., what kind of activities do you suspect go on in the real SSP? Phase Templar is asking, do you believe in time travel? Rich Buckley wants to know if we have jump rooms to a Mars base.
Well, we did the last two. We already answered those last two.
Okay, so it's...
But the first one is pretty straight on. If a secret space program did exist, what kinds of activities are taking place?
Okay. As far as a jump room to Mars, we don't need that because I think we have craft that can get there. Okay. What was the second one? I just wanted to say something about that real quick.
Time travel.
Time travel was the other one.
The
Yeah.
idea deeply intrigues me, and I have delved into research in that direction that I would rather not talk about because I can't substantiate any of the ideas or things. Okay.
Well,
So-
you did say earlier that people were on record with you saying that they had started looking into this 100 years ago.
100 years ago. So, yeah, I think there's some. Look, I think there's definitely something possible with practical, either looking through or moving. Something. There's something going on with time technology. Yes, I firmly am convinced at this point in time. Yeah.
Wow, great question.
But now, what would a secret space program do? Well, the first thing is, what does let's look at the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force. What does the U.S. Navy do? The ships and the subs patrol the seas of the world, right?
Yes.
And so the ships of the secret space program patrol the seas of the planets, of outer space, off planet. I'm not trying to say, they're traveling the stars right now. I doubt that at this point. But same with the Air Force. The Air Force, they're deployed to a certain area and they fly sorties. So basically, I think what Secret Space Program does is they patrol and they get specific taskings based on, well, they patrol this area because there's a reason to patrol that area. For instance, take from the late 80s, I don't know if it still exists, the Kuiper Aerial Observatory. Okay, it was in a KC-135. I've been on it. I got a tour of it years ago. I had an in-law that took me on it. And it had, they would go to New Zealand every year and only look at a piece of the sky that you could see from New Zealand. Well, what if, they're looking for signs of the cousins and they would say, uh-oh, we're seeing signs of life out there or something out there. Space Force, Secret Space Program ships would be sent, kind of go out there and take a look, patrol that area. That's just an example.
Right. Okay. All right. Check them out. Yeah.
They would do the things that our military does. They're just doing it off planet, which is cool. Totally cool to think about. I was born in the wrong era. Anyway.
Miss Olivia, your last question.
Christine Tagger wants to know, so is the Space Force strictly American or are other nations involved? And if so, who?
When you're talking that, you're talking the what we refer to as major powers. It's got to be nations that have the money or access to the money. So we're talking the United States, Russia, China, the big players, England. But then again, when you get in with some of these, there's going to be allied agreements and overlap. Okay, like our traditional allies, our secret space programs, they give us personnel and certain resources. Maybe we provide the ships, whatever, however it works. Now, if as some people theorize that they're we realize this is a threat entirely to humanity, with certain exceptions, there could be even a much more global team. But that's getting into the weeds on the discussion. Basically, if a nation has the money to put people in space, then those are the ones you have to look at for having some type of secret operations up in space.
Absolutely. And the Space Force itself is Trump's version of America dominance. It's interesting because I mentioned the continuity of government program that existed and exists now, and how they apply those rules of COG to the secret space program, which is how they can get away with not telling us about it. Interestingly enough, Donald Rumsfeld, who's a key player in developing COG, proposed in 2003 under the Bush II administration Space Command, which all the other guys would have to pony up to. So that idea of applying the COG rules in space, and that's where we get the intense secrecy, holds up when we see players themselves. Rumsfeld was a particularly big one. Thank you very much, Miss Olivia. That was fantastic. I've got a quick roll call to read, and we're going to say goodbye. Walter, unbelievable information. Please stay with us so we can close out with you. Just a couple of people I wanted to read off who helped so much in the No SSP TM campaign that we did very successfully. As I said, we got incredible numbers on Twitter about it, which tells me that everyone was really enlivened by the idea that they could stand up against this threat coming in from outside, trying to steal IP information for whatever reason. But certainly the dangers existed that whoever got their hands on the IP of the SSP could sell it to a corporation that would shut it down. So the risk was high, and the people who came forward, former Assistant Housing Secretary Catherine Austin Fitts, taking time out of her schedule, working really on this, doing a fantastic job, putting it out there and informing us about copyright trolls, which I think is very important. And I'm getting some wind tunnel from you, Walter. Is there some wind happening? Suddenly it's off.
That's weird. The fan. But I haven't moved it or anything. Okay. I might have shifted. Sorry. I apologize.
I think what it is when you talk, it blows away the fan. But when you're just there, it's watch out.
Because I'm so full of the hot air that the fan just becomes.
You're overflowing. Yes. So just a couple people in some of these channels. Richard Dolan, of course, came forward and did some very pointed shows dealing with the trademark threat of the secret space program. Absolutely crucial. And thank you very much, Richard. We really appreciate it. Dr. Joseph Farrell taking time out from developing this incredible pipe organ that he's doing. And he got on it. He knew right away that the trademark of the SSP was a threat. Came forward. Thank you, Dr. Farrell. Of course, we're going to have you back on the show on November 16th. Everybody get ready for that. That's going to be fantastic. One of the best X episodes coming up. And also some other people who worked really hard. I think I want to point out a couple of them, because one guy was out there doing a show nightly, and that was C.W. Chanter. He did an excellent job of pointing out the specifics around the trademark because he's so familiar with law. Excellent job on that, and just phenomenal focus on it. Really great. Joe from the Carolinas, of course. We know Joe doing very witty reports and stuff, but he can be hard-hitting too out there, and he did a great job of putting it out hardcore. And I don't want to miss anybody. Of course, we're coming back tomorrow, so if I missed anybody, I'll catch them then. And I do want to point out, as I said earlier, Gigi Young did an excellent job of standing up and really pointing out what was wrong with this in a very eloquent way. And finally, as I pointed out earlier, Tracy Inaros just doing something phenomenal in tweeting the No SSP tag while being associated in the public's mind. Although she doesn't work so much with those guys, she, you could say that people would assume that she would be working with them to do this. And what's fascinating is she decided to take her own journalistic principles as a journalist, which she has a background in, and say, I don't think it's right to trademark the secret space program. That takes a lot of guts. And we here at Dark Journalist really, I appreciate it. And it's the kind of courage that we notice in a community like this. Thank you very much, Teresa. And tomorrow night, we're coming back at 6 p.m. We're going to be doing more on the secret space program versus the secret space force that we're seeing Trump unveiling right before our eyes. Walter, it was great to have you. Thank you so much. And
thanks for asking me. I'd just like to say one thing, because some people were asking. They heard me talk about Shimmering Light in some of my other books, and they say, I can't find them on Amazon. That's because I don't do business with Amazon. They're very, very bad for small press guys. My stuff, print on demand, lulu.com. That's where you can find it. That's my shameful marketing.
Dr. Farrell just did a book on Lulu. Actually, it's getting very popular now.
And he's very happy.
Okay, good.
He told me he wished he'd done it, become his own publisher a long time ago.
Unbelievable.
Now he's a big difference.
Now he's going to roll. We remember the days.
Can I just throw one question out to both of you?
Sure.
Okay, so I think I know the answer, but Cheng Bing wants to know, will you keep the heat on in case Corey Good is lying?
Oh, yeah. No. I mean, we're keeping the closest possible eye on the trademark situation, and there are already legal machinations that were in place to remove the trademark in any case. But I will say that it seems to me that it's an authentic statement. And Walter, you had a statement on Facebook for Corey Good, where you said something along that line, like it was the right thing to do.
Oh yeah, I applaud him for dropping trademarking the acronym, and of course he should also not trademark the phrase "secret space program." Yeah, absolutely. But it doesn't mean I'm buying his story.
No.
I give him no quarter on that because I think that's nonsense. But I just think I think it was a wise move, and
I think
he deserves some credit for.
We're all in agreement on that. There's no question about it.
There's room for all of us here, folks. There's room for us serious researchers that present evidence-based research and hypotheses, and then there's room for the nutty stuff. The audience can decide.
I like it. That's better. And I think we all have to respect each other's rights in working this kind of thing. Thank you so much, everyone. Wow, Olivia, amazing questions. Great crowd, fantastic people. And we're coming back to you tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. And thank you so much. We'll see you then with the X series. We're going to do more kind of getting into the X part. We had this incredible story of the SSP, no SSP TM story where the Blue Avian group came forward and said they weren't going to pursue that. So it ate up a lot of the oxygen for the X show. We're going to make this a two-parter. And we will see you tomorrow night.
Oh,
and here's the question. What's for dinner now, Olivia?
My pillow in about 5 minutes.
I like that. Yeah. Super. Well, I mean, you always get kind of good ideas. You'll get a second whip. Walter, it's great to have you. We're going to have you back in November.
Great. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic. And we will see everyone tomorrow night, 6 p.m. right here. Thank you so much. And no SSPTM. Congratulations to all. I think that's a win-win for everybody, even the people who are attempting to copyright it. So bravo. And we will see you soon.
Yay.